they weren't allowed to take any of the money put in. They were just allowed a set rental, which is the cost for maintaining the machines and things like that. Is that
that's
other
changed?
Than, oh, has it? Okay,
yes,
so I didn't know
they used to take a site rental per machine, and that was capped. In the last 12, 18 months, they've changed it, so there's a percentage to it as well. So you can earn more than what was your previous site rental.
Oh, okay.
That's only in the tavern pubs. Obviously, in the clubs, it's different because the money that goes through this machine comes back to the club.
Okay. So they literally. So that's not based on the cost of maintaining the machines or the cost of the power and all that sort of stuff. It's a genuine incentive to increase gambling, is it?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. I didn't know that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Southgate.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm interested in the comment around merging of clubs. I understand the environment around that. So if clubs come together, would it be a disadvantage to? In what way would it be a disadvantage to you to not have the additional machines? If say one of the other clubs came and cohabitated in your building, you've still got the same machines. You're saying that in order to be profitable, you would need them to bring their additional machines as well, or? No,
what I'm saying is that most of the clubs that would be in a position that they wanted to talk about merging are doing so because they're have debt or can't meet their obligations. We've had discussions. We would, in order for us to merge with another club, we would have to take on the debt that they have, and from a purely business point of view, it wouldn't be beneficial to us if we were taking on their debt without there being some sort of income.
So you'd use it as an offset. Their machines coming would be partly an offset.
And we wouldn't get all of their machines. So currently we have 18 machines. The cap in Hamilton is 24. So most venues have either 9 or 18 machines, other clubs. So we would pick up 6. There would be a sinking, we'd lose 3 in Hamilton.
Yeah.
But in my role as GM, I would not be talking to some of the other clubs about amalgamation or merging if we had to take on their debt and we were only getting their members. A lot of these clubs have 80 or 90 members, so the financial return by just having those extra 80 or 90 members wouldn't benefit us at all, knowing some of the debt levels that some of these clubs are carrying.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Councillor Pascoe.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chair. Just wanting to add Gary on to Councillor Gary's questions. That increased site rental that you mentioned that the taverns and pubs have, that doesn't affect the 91% that is returned back to the user, you know, the 91% which we've been told is the returned money as prize money. Does the increase, is it kind of like a turnover, you know, so there's a percentage of the turnover from each machine which is calculated and added back as a kind of a bonus rental to those organisations? Is that the way that it works?
That's correct. The machines are supposed to return between 87 and 90 odd percent, depending on what jackpots are connected to it as well. The money that goes in the machine minus the council credits and the copper refills will give you a banking figure. That banking figure is then duties paid on, the site rental is paid out of that. So your site rental is based on the percentage of that banking figure.
But it doesn't affect the payback to the user.
No.
It really comes out of that other 9% or whatever it is.
It comes out of that percentage of money that should be going back to the public
to the community, perhaps.
Correct.
Yeah, to the community. Okay, thank you for that. Thanks.
Right, thanks very much, Ken, for submitting today.
Thank you very much.
Now, committee members, with your leave, Susan is in the audience, so we will switch back to the dangerous and unsanitary buildings policy. So, Susan, welcome. Susan, you have 10 minutes. The bell will go at 7 if you want to allow 3 minutes for elected members for questions. So we're in your hands.
So I'd like to make a submission on the dangerous and unsanitary buildings policy. I do this as obviously a building owner in the Hamilton region, owning a couple of commercial buildings, and having a history of dealing with neighbours with all sorts of dangerous and unsanitary habits and behaviours. And when I saw this request for consultation, I read the policy that has been proposed to address the Act from central government, and I must admit I thought that it was inadequate. So I am... Can you see my PowerPoint? Yes?
We have it in front of us on here as well.
Lovely. So generally I'm supportive of the idea of the City Council having a policy that supports management, I guess identification and management of dangerous and unsanitary buildings.
We do have a printed copy as well, Susan, if we can't get that, so if you can continue.
It was up, so,
Oh.
yeah, so I'm supportive of this, but my issues, however, relate to the quality of the actual policy and its adequacy to address the acts. So as a citizen, I guess there's a number of things that I see as flaws in what has been proposed. Firstly, the policy as it's written gives responsibility for enacting the policy and essentially a central government act to what I would view as the largely unqualified citizens of Hamilton. So it looks at the public as identifying these unsanitary and unsafe buildings and telling the council. In my view, it's actually the responsibility of the Hamilton City Council to enact this policy, not to essentially abdicate it to people who may in fact not be qualified in sanitation or in building safety. So I feel the writing of the policy actually needs to be flipped for the City Council to take its responsibilities under that Act, and I understand central government direction. So I think that's quite a big issue, and it's quite a large onus to put on people. I know that I have made submissions to the City Council around really the state of Victoria Street and things that I see such as rusting out and rotting verandas, etc. And it's very unclear what actually happens to them and whether responsibility is taken. I'm not a builder, etc. But I think that the sort of people doing this work, it needs to sit under the council, and council who has, for example, building inspectors, etc., people who have expertise in sanitation need to be conducting work. It may well be that public contribute to that, but I'm suggesting that in fact that needs to sit with the council. I also think, and I'll just move on, there's some technical issues in the policy. You know, my background involves developing quality management systems, and what I see is a policy which is significantly out of date. It's written in a reactionary manner, so it's kind of addressing the Act, but I don't see this policy as actually establishing a kind of self-assessing, evaluative, continuous improvement orientated quality system that can be measured and improved annually. So it seems to me it's addressing the Act, but it's actually not addressing the problem that the Act is written to address. I note, for example, it fails to specifically and accurately identify the Act and clauses in the Act it's supposed to enact. It doesn't give very specific definitions of terminology. It's unclear, for example, if verandas are part of this policy or not. And I think the policies and the processes and procedures to actually start and enact this new system are also missing from this. And there's also no timelines for implementation or processing. So anyone reading this would have no idea if they identified a building with an issue, what and when was going to actually happen, and what the quality standards of the Hamilton City Council were around that. I see the Act as being quite good in its wording of actually protecting the City Council from legal action by other parties, but I would see it very weak on actually implementing what this policy needs to be about. A lot of buildings down the Victoria Street are actually empty. We've had instances of people graffitiing both of our buildings, and they've managed to get on the rooftops of buildings, etc. And I do think the risk of fire in some of these empty buildings where people break in and live is something that would need to be addressed by a policy like this by the council. So I guess my view is that I think this policy needs completely revamped to a much higher standard, where it can be measured and improved over time, and truly ensure that buildings are sanitary and safe in the Hamilton area. So that's my submission.
That's great, thank you, Susan. We've still got a few minutes, so Councillor Mallett and then Councillor Southgate.
Thanks very much, Susan.
Yep.
Correct me if I'm wrong, I think what you're saying is that our policy is very passive and relies on the general public, the residents, to, hey, there's a grubby looking building,
Yes.
I'll report it to council.
Yes.
These are lay people who wouldn't know what they're talking
Exactly.
in many occasions. So
Exactly.
the
Yep.
alternative, so what are you suggesting that somewhere on the line council has a database of every building, every building within the city,
Yes.
and proactively once every 5 years or something goes out and does a sort of a warrant of fitness check on buildings? Is that
Essentially, in a way that kind of happens now under the, the building inspections that people have. I mean, when I looked at this policy, I couldn't actually see, does it pertain to commercial buildings, public buildings, residential buildings? It didn't actually tell you where this starts and finishes, but I think if it was meant to pertain to public and commercial buildings, then there are already systems of inspection, and perhaps it could be a small rejig where this is something that is done within that inspection to make it not an unwieldy, unmanageable.
Could you just expand a bit on the current system of inspection? Because I'm not aware of, I mean, I'm aware of if you've got a lift,
Yep.
someone comes and checks that every,
Yes.
like it's been a while since I've been involved in a build,
Yep.
but they check the lift.
Yep.
I don't know, there might be some sort of fire, every now and then there's a building inspection to make sure that
There
doors
is.
aren't, that are supposed to
Yep.
be
Yep.
not fire retardant and not left
Yep.
open and things like that.
Yep.
So you would,
So we do have a building warrant of fitness system, and it seems to me that there's a wonderful chance to make a small adjustment to that, which would mean it was a small change for the council to actually get a clear picture. It may be that and there's some cycle set up where someone from the council does an initial look at safety and sanitation in buildings. It's recorded on a file, and then there can from time to time be some sort of review of this where there needs to be. Companies like Enel who do
like who?
Enels who do building inspections, etc. It seems to me if they had a clearly worded statement of what to look for, or other companies like I think Coffees who do this kind of work too, that it could be something that they literally did while they were there rather than some massive new process.
Okay. Assuming we have this system, where would the cost fall? Would you think it appropriate that it fell with the building owner?
I think remediation should belong to the building owner. My parents come from Gore, and I'm aware the Gore Council has a policy where if you have a building or a section or something that's unsafe, they will notify you of this and what needs to be done. And if you don't
But
actually...
the actual identification process of that
can be
that
from
can't
the
be done-
council
pardon?
or it can be done by the council or the public. If people don't actually remediate whatever they're asked to remediate, the council does it and charges them with a premium for actually doing that work. And
But-
it makes a huge difference.
Sorry, Susan,
Okay.
not so much the remediation, but the
Yep.
actual identification, which is
Yep.
the, so the remediation, we all understand that's the
Yep.
building owner's job.
Yep.
But the actual process of identifying the faults,
Yes.
which could be a 3-yearly, 10-yearly, 6-yearly inspection, blah, 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 that should be carried out by council, or council could contract someone to do it on their
Yes.
behalf, but it would be a council responsibility, which
I
would be a
think so.
council-funded thing.
Yep.
And council would recoup that funding from where, do you think?
Well, it could be rates. It could be depending on the extent of the danger. I mean, I think there are people who...
Should it be the building owner? I mean, car owners pay for their own warrant of
Yeah,
fitness.
I think it would be good for it to belong to the business owners, because a lot of the people who have unsanitary and unsafe buildings know they have them and they sit on them in that state for years and years. So
Okay, we
Thank
are
you.
out of time, but I am going to go to Councillor Southgate for one last question.
Quickest questions, because you did ask about cost, so that's, I'm happy with that. So the key point for you is around the problem definition. What the key starting point is having council determine a problem definition.
yes,
Okay, and the second part is, have you done any thinking about, because we are a regulatory authority, but we can't deal with criminal action,
Yep.
how those two things would work together? Have you
yes.
any thought on that?
I think clearly the criminal belongs to police to actually address, but I think there's often precursors to crime that are things like unsanitary, unsafe, unsecure buildings, empty buildings, and we have a large number of them in the central city particularly that I think are of concern.
Thank you for your excellent submission.
Great, thank you, Susan. Thanks for coming. Just welcome to Councillors McPherson, Casson and Bunting and the Deputy Mayor who's just stepped out. We were just doing the one submission for the dangerous and sanitary buildings policy. She was a couple of moments late, so we have heard from one submitter on the gambling, which was Ken Markham from Hamilton Workmen's Club, so you might want to YouTube that later in your spare time. So we will go back to gambling, and we do need to stick strictly to time. People have taken time out of their busy schedules today to be with us, so I will do my best to make sure that the questions are shared around the room evenly. So if you're first up all the time, that may not mean that you get to ask your questions first up. So our next submitter, if you're having any issues, new elected members to the room with the web-based program that we're using today, please just indicate to governance. Julie's gone now, and our expert technician Amy will be able to help you. So we're now going to go to submission from Waikato University Sports Clubs Incorporated, which is Nicola Claydon. Nicola, good morning. Now, Nicola, you know the drill. The bell will go at 7 minutes, so you need to wrap up right then and there so that elected members have 3 minutes remaining for questions. So we're in your hands.
Good morning. My name is Nicola Claydon. I'm the Sport Project Manager at the University of Waikato. I'm here representing University of Waikato Sports Clubs. That's an incorporated society with charitable status and has been since March 2011. The purpose of this group is to provide governance and administrative support to the 7 major University of Waikato sports clubs. These sports clubs have a history spanning well over 50 years, and the 7 member clubs are Waikato Unicol Association Football Club, University of Waikato Netball Club, University of Waikato Hockey Club, University of Waikato Rowing Club, University of Waikato Rugby Club, Hamilton Star University of Waikato Cricket Club, and the University of Waikato Basketball Club. All clubs are incorporated and charitable. They're all located in Hamilton City and all cater for the students at the University of Waikato, and they also cater for community members. In terms of the Class 4 gambling venue policy, University of Waikato Sports Clubs supports option B. We do not support the proposed policy as it is too restrictive. We support that the current policy is retained as it enables venues to relocate from outside of a gambling permitted area to within a gambling permitted area, option B. Plus it allows the ability to relocate to new modern premises. We also support all proven efforts to further minimise harm that's caused by gambling. The impact of a change on University of Waikato sports clubs is that it receives a number of funds from community grant funders, which are critical to the continued survival and operations of University of Waikato sports clubs, all the clubs as listed above. These organisations support the well-being of University of Waikato students and the local community due to their involvement in sport, and I'll presume that councillors understand the importance of sport on the well-being of us. Without any unidentified or new funding stream, these clubs would struggle to survive. In 2017, University of Waikato sports clubs received approximately $100,000 from community grant funders. These were from a range of NZCT, Trillion Trust, Southern Trust, Lion Foundation, Grassroots Trust, and the New Zealand Racing Board. The $100,000 was provided to support club operations, including coaches, uniforms, team travel, facility hire, and sports equipment. There is no alternative identified income streams, and with increased accountabilities, governance, and professionalism demanded of clubs, expenses are increasing annually. If current venues are revoked of their Class 4 gambling licence, there will be a reduced amount of community funding available in Hamilton City, and thus a reduction on availability of funding to the University of Waikato sports clubs. And that's why we support option B.
That's great, Nicola. We'll jump straight into questions. Councillor McPherson.
Hi again. Nicola, you said 100K for the clubs collectively last year.
Yep.
Approximately what proportion would that be of their overall budget of those 7 clubs?
Um,
I'm trying to get a picture of whether the Pokey grant money is a majority or only a small portion, or you know.
It varies with each club.
Yeah.
It's probably around, could well be 60% for rugby, but well, yeah, I unfortunately don't have those figures there, but it's critical, and there's no other income for that.
What sort of player fee money does that match the 100K from the trusts?
Player fees. Again, wouldn't have the exact fee on that. They
So it's a bit hard for me to put it in proportion.
Proportions, right.
Yeah, to see how it relates to the other potential sources of income.
Right.
Does the university put in any contribution out of student fees as a general thing, not out of a player fee, but generally?
Through the student service levy, the university provides some fees to about 25k in actual sponsorship funding, and that they provide other resources in terms of administration and sport management fees.
And facility use?
And obviously the facility use, the clubs do pay for access to facilities at the University of Waikato. The clubs try and limit the subscription fees to students due to their lack of funds, personal funds, but they do all do receive subscription fees. And for hockey, that's huge because of the costs of higher facilities.
It's huge, yeah. Thanks. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Councillor McPherson. Deputy Mayor.
Just with the university processes, and obviously as the clubs got together and obviously worked out a submission, is there any sort of relationship to the, say, the university council or the formal university approach with regard to this, or is
No, this particular is from University of Waikato Sports Clubs Board,
Right.
of which there are representatives from the university on that board.
Yeah, right. So basically, you are, if you like, autonomous from any, and I don't have a feel of what the university council thinks, or you're autonomous from the university as an institution, so to speak.
Yeah, as I say, there's representatives from the university
Sure.
on that board,
Yeah.
from the senior leadership team. So, and they have supported me doing the submission today.
Oh no, that's fine. So yeah, okay, no. So in other words, they don't necessarily, as a university, have a position apart from being relaxed about your submission.
Yes.
Yeah, no, it's not a trick question. It's just trying to work out. Thank you. No, that's good.
Thank you. Councillor Henry, final question.
Thank you so much for your submission. Look, just a question. You talked about 2011. Is that when you started receiving the grants? I wasn't sure.
2011
What
is when this board was started and incorporated.
Oh, I see. Okay. So I'm just trying to figure out when you. So did you get straight from the start money from these organisations?
These organisations have been seeking funding from community grant funders from the onset of them starting, which was well before 2011.
Right.
This particular board, which is a governing body of these clubs, started in 2011 and has helped them to continue to seek those grant funding.
Okay. I would just love to know what they've done before the grant funding, but
Oh no,
because
they have always sought community grant funding prior to 2011.
Yeah, yeah.
It's just this particular board
Board
that
had-
helps the
okay.
governance of these clubs that started in 2011. But the clubs themselves have always sought community grant funding from the onset of the clubs, of which some go back a long time.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Nicola, for talking to us today.
Thank you.
Right, welcome, Mayor Andrew. Now we are going to move on to the next submitter from Northern Districts Cricket, which is Ben McCormack. And good morning, Ben. You're very familiar with our process. You have 7 minutes. The bell will go. Please try and leave time remaining for questions from elected members.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. So, yeah, Ben McCormack, CEO of Northern Districts Cricket. I've been here for 6 months now. I've come across from Australia. I was operating in sports administration over there for about 15 years. And can I firstly say that around this, it's been a real surprise coming to New Zealand how much money that the actual gaming trust put back into the community in this country, and I really think that's a real strength of the system here in this country. In Australia, nothing is returned to the community from pokies revenues. It all goes to shareholders of those companies or the publicans that own those venues. So that's a real point worth making for New Zealand and a real strength of the system here. We are a not-for-profit organisation. We have 6 district associations that sit underneath us. One of those being the Hamilton Cricket Association, which is representative of cricket across your region that the Hamilton City Council go across. In terms of us, we currently receive over $800,000 in gaming trust funds. Our operation runs from Taupo all the way to the very north of the island, cutting out Auckland. But in terms of Hamilton alone, we probably we forward on about $100,000 in funding to Hamilton Cricket Association to run their operations in growing the game at a community level. They also, as a body, gain about $150,000 of community funding from gaming machines to grow the game in Hamilton. So that's $250,000 worth of funding for cricket and growing the game across Hamilton. In terms of our funding, the $800,000 represents about 20% of all of our revenues, and of that $800,000, that's about 50% of the funding that we have for community cricket. So it is a really important part of our revenue streams and business. This allows us to divert other funds to things like putting on events that Hamiltonians benefit from, international and domestic cricket as well. So this goes further than just growing the game, but also putting on things to entertain the masses in this great city. In terms of the funding and the outcomes of that, we have nearly 12,500 residents that have cricket experiences in terms of playing and being exposed to the game. That's not the people that come into Seddon Park and watch cricket. That's people that have picked up a bat and ball and experienced the game in the last year. So that's a significant number. 120 coaches, 115 umpires and more than 500 volunteers that are involved in the game just in Hamilton. This is a large percentage of your residents. 25% of those are female. So this is not just a game for males. We do also touch points across all of the community. The current regos and program costs of cricket, it's free for the introductory products in schools. So we don't charge a fee to get involved in cricket in schools. That is different to the Australian system as well. Because they don't have that funding, they do charge a fee-for-service program. In terms of kids' regos, they're currently around about $30 to register for cricket. We envisage, in talking to Hamilton Cricket as well, that would go up to somewhere around $100 because it's heavily subsidised by this funding. In terms of adult regos, they're currently around about $180 for a year to play cricket. We envisage that will go up to about $400. The real danger here is that we return to being an elitist sport rather than a sport for all, and that's the opposite of what we're trying to achieve at cricket. Currently, cost isn't the major contributing factor to people not playing cricket, and we're open to players and people of all backgrounds and financial means. We don't want to go backwards on that. We know that we suspect that we would lose volunteers because a lot of this funding actually goes to supporting them in their roles and what they do. All of a sudden what they will be doing will be a lot harder we won't have people working in cricket. We're currently well resourced. We have 2 full-time administrators that deliver the game in Hamilton, on top of the support that Northern Districts provides them as well in services. That will reduce undoubtedly. We want to grow our programs, we want to be in more schools, we want to reach more kids, we want to reach more diverse groups, we want more girls playing cricket, and we actually want to grow. This won't allow us to do that. This will make sure that we do go backwards as a sport, and we are really strong in supporting that the current policy is retained for that point and that reason. Thank you.
Great, thanks Ben, excellent. We'll go to questions. Now please members, just work collegially with each other and allow everyone to have questions, so ask the most important 1 or 2 would be very helpful for everyone. Councillor Mallett.
Thank you. Thanks, Ben. Just summarising what you said, you're telling us that the gambling money is material, significantly material to your operation, and that your recommendation is that we don't change from the current situation.
Correct.
Okay, so that's your written thing. So it was quite powerful saying what the implication, what the consequences of the pulling out the Venue 4 funding would do in terms of members' subscriptions and things like that. Are there other sources you can go to?
Absolutely not, no. This has been something that's been exhausted. We would have more money in cricket if we could. So that's something certainly in my first 6 months have been looking at other revenue streams, because we want to diversify our revenue streams as well and protect ourselves from things like this happening. That's proving very difficult in this country because there is such a heavy reliance on the gaming funding, and as I said, that's not something that happens in Australia, but to unwind that will be a monumental task.
Okay, thank you, Ben.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor McPherson.
Yeah, hi. Look, if I got your figures right, 800,000 income for ND cricket from this source?
Yes.
Yeah, or the collective
From
of
Gaming
sources.
Trust, yeah.
For about a bit over 12,000 people who had experience in the area.
33,000 across ND.
Okay,
So the 250,000 of gaming trust funding that comes into Hamilton, which is 100 from us and 150 direct to Hamilton Cricket, relates to the 12,000 participants.
So that's about $20–25 per person who's having a cricket experience. That's how it works. I've just done the figures roughly, division, yeah. So you said you're looking at putting up the local charge for a kid playing cricket from 30 to perhaps 100?
Yeah, the subsidies that are currently in place wouldn't exist anymore, so that would be about the cost, yeah.
So you're saying there'd be no money coming in? That's a $70 increase, but this only, even all of the pokey money only delivers $20 to $25 per person.
Yeah, correct, but all of the money's not spent on just rego fees.
I don't understand the difference. You're wanting to put your fees up for Hamilton players by $70 per player. You're saying the pokey money is going to cause, losing that will cause some significant problems, but that's only about a third of the increase that you're talking about.
Correct, because all of that money is not dedicated to rego fees. The $25...
I don't understand what your rego fees are, sorry.
The $30 going up to $100 is the rego fee.
Yeah, but what...
So that $70 difference is not all just made up. You're saying that the funding is $25 ahead for the 12,000 participants. All of that doesn't go to just generating those participants.
Yeah, I don't understand.
There's other parts of the cricket business that are run.
You're putting the case to us that this would wipe the pokey money. And I'm trying to work out what you would replace it with. So obviously not the $70.
Yeah, absolutely, because that would then subsidise the other operations of Hamilton Cricket that don't exist because of the gaming funding leaving.
All the gaming funding is going to leave because of this, you're saying?
Over time, absolutely.
Over time, okay. Are you aware that we've had this gaming policy since 2002, which is 16 years? And are you aware of what the drop in gaming funding for Hamilton has been during that time with a similar policy in place, a reducing number of venues?
That's not, from my understanding of the policy, it is a different policy, otherwise we wouldn't be here talking about it. So that there's
Okay.
a continued increase.
I think we need...
I give up.
Yeah. Councillor Bunting.
Thanks very Brief. Really interested in what you said about the Australian model over there. So you're saying that Australian cricket gets no gambling money over there, is that right? So how
No gaming trust money
Oh,
coming
gaming
out of
trust money.
pokies venues.
Right, so they still get money from racing and that sort of stuff, is that right? Or?
Yeah, online. They have an online. Bet365 is a major partner of Cricket Australia. Yeah.
Okay, so what would be the fundamental difference? Because Australia's not cricket isn't an elitist sport in Australia, obviously, is it?
No.
No. Okay, so what's the difference in the funding models there?
That they have just signed a deal for $1.1 billion for their TV rights. Their
Okay.
commercial product is much, much stronger in that country
Okay.
due to the size of population, and that is
Right.
what subsidises the game in Australia. That is not what we have here.
Right, and it's not looking like that's going to happen here? Or?
No.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Taylor.
Thank you. Yeah, look, I'm just trying to flesh out just further to Councillor McPherson's questions about the fees there. When you said the adult fees from 180 to 400, did you say?
Correct.
So can you just give me a bit of the science behind that? I mean, how over what sort of period are you saying, and exactly can you spell out why?
Yeah, if the money from this disappears over time, so say that the sinking lid policy comes in and over 10 years there are no venues, there are no trust funding money coming to us. So it's $250,000 that the Hamilton Cricket won't have from this source.
Yeah. So this could be over a decade, or
Depends how quick the venues disappear. I'm not across that part.
right. So this is assuming nothing.
Zero.
Coming in.
Correct. Yeah. This is not a next year if one venue disappears, but this is certainly worst case scenario for us.
Okay. Thanks.
All right, thanks very much, Ben. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, our next submitter is Chris Rollett. Now, Chris is an individual submitter, so he will have 5 minutes. So your sheet's a little bit incorrect there, elected members. Morning, Chris. Morning. So, Chris, the bell will ding at 3 minutes, indicating there's you need to wrap up if you want elected members to have a couple of minutes for questions.
I'll be very brief. I'm just a one-page sort of guy. So,
Great.
get your questions ready if you want to use the time up. Class 4 gaming. I've been in the industry, working in the hospitality industry for over 20 years, and I've seen the changes over that period of time. Our industry, and this is from someone who works in it, it's extremely well regulated and enforced. We have a very rigid criteria we have to work within, and part of that is the way it's administered through the trust. Now, 40% of the returns from gaming, from Class 4 gaming, go back to the community, and it's an extremely valuable resource, for clubs and community groups, which has been spoken about. I believe we've got the best gaming model in the world because it ensures so much of that gaming resource goes back to the community as a targeted resource rather than into the central government via the tax mechanism. It's my contention that a cap on the number of gaming machines, that's sensible. A sinking lid is not, because you are just simply going to have a death of 1,000 cuts to those community groups who rely on that funding stream. It removes the ability to continue the current level of funding for the community and those groups. I've been involved in various events which have relied on that gaming funding, from sporting events to cultural events, that they would simply not have occurred if we couldn't get the level of funding that we have achieved. The other thing that in the new policy or suggestion is the way relocations are dealt with. At the moment, what we've got is, with our sinking lid, we actually attract more forcing clusters, and clusters from a marketing point of view are extremely effective. You get high activity in one area. So if you want dens of gambling activity, that's what we're actually causing through this policy of having no relocations. I believe you're better off to have a policy that enables relocations, it spreads the load out into different areas, and you can control the impact of that gaming through sensible planning decisions. It's a small number of people who have problem gambling, but they're extremely well publicised. and I understand the ideology of gaming machines is challenging to some sectors of society, but equally that ideology is the ideology of personal choice and individual responsibility. There will be more people adversely affected by reducing gaming and the way we have our policy at the moment, if there are less sporting clubs and community groups able to use that as an ongoing resource. And it's well publicised that Hamilton City Council is in a bit of a financial hole. I don't think you want to be putting any extra expectations on your limited resources. As a comparison, we look at the casino in town as an avenue for funding for these community groups. Last year, the casino and community grants gave away $690,000. New Zealand Community Trust, which is only one of the big 6 trusts, gave $33 million away to community groups. So we need to put that in comparison too.
Are you going to allow time for questions, Chris? Are you nearly there?
I'm done.
Are you done?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So we'll go to questions. Councillor Mallett. No, Dave, you were on there, so...
Yeah, I was.
Did you hit him? Okay, Councillor McPherson, you're up.
Chris, quick question, but a good point about the casino. Do you think the return from pokies to the community of 42% could stand being up to, say, 50-50?
I think you've got to look at it pragmatically and say, would they be economic to run at that level? I don't know. I couldn't answer that. I'm not an expert in that area. I can only speak from my personal experience of what I've done with the gaming machines.
But it'd be good for the community if that happened, wouldn't it?
Oh, look, why don't you put a regional levy on it and do it that way instead of a fuel tax? I mean, there's always you can go around it, isn't there? I don't know.
Good idea, but I don't think we're allowed to.
Yeah, I'm sure you'll give it a crack when you go away.
Very good idea. Can we make it 60 then? Yeah. Sorry, I'll
You're
finish.
good. Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Mallett.
Thank you, Chris. You talked about, your written thing talks about the sinking lid versus you're saying keep it the same. To you, is it acceptable that as the like a ratio to population, as the population of Hamilton grows, is it acceptable to you that that ratio remains the same? So you could, in actual fact, have more pokies divided by a biggest population equals the ratio of population, and I've got no idea what it would be, but I'm just trying to, because obviously as your population grows, the need or the demand, I guess, for these sorts of funds will increase also.
To my mind, I think if you have the sinking lid, you've got no opportunity with
Correct.
it. With a cap and a sensible relocation policy, you can at least spread it out through the mechanism that's there. If you feel the need to put more in, then that's for the council to sort out, you know, and the planning people to sort out.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thanks, Chris. Nice and succinct.
Thank you.
Right, our next submission is the CE from Hauraki Primary Health Organisation. Hugh, good morning.
Morning.
How are you? Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. Kia ora koutou katoa. Iwi whānau a tānou waka. I'm Hugh Kinnamonth. I'm the Chief Executive of the Hauraki Primary Health Organisation. We're headquartered in Thames, but we spread across the Waikato. We have 140,000 people enrolled with 24 general practice teams. 80,000 of those people are living in Hamilton. On a personal level, I play the pokies. I'm one of the 92% of people, and I'm more than happy to use the industry's figures, 92% of people who play pokies who don't have any harm, who have a bit of a fling, a bit of entertainment. So I'm not here as a zealot. I'm here partly personally and partly from a health perspective. The major struggle we're facing in health at the moment are diseases of poverty. Thousands of children end up admitted to hospital up on the hill for completely avoidable reasons. Respiratory illness due to poor housing, poor clothing, damp, and various diseases, various issues affecting poverty. The second issue is skin complaints. Again, poor housing, poor cleanliness, poor clothing, lack of money. The third issue is dental, sucking on cheap fizzy drinks, etc. So anything that you can do to relieve the impact of diseases of poverty in our community, I fully support and fully applaud. Now, to look at the figures that the industry has given, 92% of people play pokies have no harm. More than happy to agree with that. 8% have some level of harm. 0.5% are addicted to pokies, completely wreck their lives. In this community, that would be around 600 people at the maximum. But let's be conservative. Let's say that's only 200 people. 200 people completely wreck their lives. But not only wreck their lives, but wreck, and the industry figure again, it has been spoken, there's 10 people around them are affected by that. But again, let's be conservative and say that's perhaps, let's look at the children and say that's 3. So 200 people completely wreck their lives because they're addicted to pokies. That's 600 more people, predominantly children, who have their lives wrecked by addiction to pokie machines. But the industry figure says 8% have some level of harm. So if you go to 8% and then you multiply that out by 3, that is 3,200 people have some harm caused by pokie machines in your community, and another 9,600, predominantly children, have their lives harmed by pokie machines. Now, as I said before, and we heard from one of the previous speakers, I'm not a zealot. I play sport, and entertainment for the masses, I think, is the way our Australian friend described funding into cricket, and that's absolutely fine. And your challenge, as you well know, of balancing the individual responsibilities of the 92% who have no harm and the 8% who do have harm from a societal perspective and your community perspective. So from my perspective, a sinking lid policy to minimise the access to harm is the only way this council can go. Gambling has been around forever. I buy lotto tickets, I have the odd flutter on a horse, and as I say, on occasion I put money in a pokie machine. It's fine with me. It's fine with 92% of people. You have to look at those at the 8% of people, those 9,600 people in your community, predominantly children, who in some way, shape or form will have an increased likelihood of ending up in hospital with a completely avoidable poverty-related illness if you don't restrict the access to pokie machines. Thank you very much.
Great, lots of time for questions. Thanks, you. I am going to jump around the list a little bit to be fair to members that don't get a lot of time. So I'm going to go to Councillor Henry first, because you're usually
lovely.
last on the list.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. Well, thank you so much for your submission. Look, I always feel for children, and that's always the first thing we go to when we think about, because they're our future, and I totally get that. I just want to ask you, because of, I mean, like you say, gambling has been around forever, and it just hit me the other day because I was at a BP station I stopped for, and this guy was, while he was waiting for his petrol to be filled, he was gambling on his phone. And so we are restricting gambling machines, and that's, you know, whatever it is. But what is going to happen with, because there's now so much more gambling everywhere else, which didn't exist 20 years ago. So what, can you see that that could be overtaking, that they can't go to the pokies? Oh, well, we might as well gamble at home. I mean, what is the difference today? Have you got any answers for that?
The unintended consequences of any decision you make are, to some extent, to a large extent, unknown by any of us. Yes, technology has changed. Yes, there's this electronic gambling all over, which is an absolute scourge and is unregulated and is international and is, my own personal opinion, obviously nefarious elements of society are involved in that, and huge amounts of money. Yes, the poker machines are accessible, very accessible to very poor people. If you look at where they're located, they're almost, anywhere you go, they're almost exclusively located in low-income areas and sports clubs. So it's that sort of access that you have to control. What we can do collectively to control the electronic access to gambling is a bigger picture that I'd very, very much support your efforts on at a national government level.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Southgate.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, and thank you for your really thorough submission. Just to play a little bit of devil's advocate around some of the health issues, if I may. Certainly you've commented on diseases of poverty. First question is, if the income, or if we minimised access to pokie machines, have you done any analysis on what impact that would make on the reduction of poverty? Because poverty is a very complex...
It is indeed, and as I said, all we can do is try to minimise the impact of poverty and minimise the accessibility to, in this case, pokie machines that impact on poverty. All we can do is look at the amount of money that comes out of this community. And the money that comes out of this community, the tens of millions of dollars that come out of this community and come back into the community at large, and there isn't any clear analysis of it comes back into the Hamilton community or into national bodies like St John's, like some sporting organisations. But again, it's a complex issue. You can't just say that taking all that money out of the community and suddenly people will give their kids good food rather than fizzy drinks. No, and I'm not saying that at all. All I'm saying is that this is one element in a very complex poverty-related health arena that we face as a nation and you face as a community.
Okay, thank you. And other submitters would say that the well-being of sport vis-a-vis reducing childhood obesity, the access to alcohol, which does
Absolutely.
immense harm in our communities, and smoking would, are big problems. So reducing the amount of money going into community groups that promote sport and well-being, have you got a comment on that? Because those people would say, we're reducing childhood obesity and it's one of the biggest killers of young people.
Well, unfortunately, childhood obesity is increasing.
So, I know.
Yeah. So again, there's no magic linear connection between we do this and we have this positive outcome, we do this, we have this negative outcome. It's a far more complex issue than that. But just to take up your point about smoking and alcohol, again, the access to smoking is being heavily restricted, and we are seeing major rates of smoking decline, and therefore diseases related to smoking decline. Alcohol is not. The access to alcohol has expanded dramatically, and we are seeing increased damage from alcohol. And again, that's just one element of the health arena, as are pokie machines, as are poverty in general.
A lot of pokie machines are where access to alcohol is also available, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah. No, I just want to, I am seriously interested in the amount of benefit you get tackling one aspect of the problem or another.
And again, it's a complex issue. Personal responsibility, knowledge of good food, knowledge of nutrition, knowledge of exercise, all of that sort of thing. It's not just about money, but money is part of it.
Okay, we need to be...
Thank you.
We
Thank
need
you,
to
Madam
steer.
Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. We need just another reminder, everyone. We need to stay clear of discussion and actually just have straight questions, straight answers. I'm going to jump around again. Mayor Andrew.
I just want to thank you and your organisation for speaking for the vulnerable.
That's not a question.
Of course, I've got an open mind, and yeah, I know you've come a long way today, so thank you.
So what I just said was please questions. We are very restricted today, and I'm not going to allow questions that aren't questions. So I'm going to go to you, Councillor Mallett, for question.
Actually, the questions that have been asked previously have covered my issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Deputy Mayor.
Note that I'm a member of the District Health Board, but I do retain an open mind, obviously. I think what we're hearing from the sports club is the desperation for funding. Do you see a role for the Hauraki PHO and the other primary healthcare organisations throughout the country, if you like, to lobby government to look at, as part of a population health strategy, better and more secure funding for a lot of the sporting activities that seem to be very reliant on pokie money?
Yes, no, absolutely. We would stand with anyone to support that, and we're in negotiations with Waikato Bay of Plenty Netball at the moment to support their efforts around not just exercise and nutrition, but the whole gambit of screening programs and immunisation programs. And we'll be putting our own discretionary funding into that through the Netball Association.
Thank you, sir, for your submission.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Final question, Councillor Pascoe.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for your presentation, Hugh. Do you think do you think that we're fighting a losing battle here, in the sense that where we might want to remove one area of potential harm that is measurable, it simply opens the door to other types of gambling, which Councillor Henry alluded to, which are probably unmeasurable?
Yeah, to some extent, yes. That's not to say we should stop that fight, though. We should do everything in our powers to minimise the harm. And as technology changes, the world changes, the socio-economics, the societal changes that happen, and we have to adapt to those. And I'm telling you, your jobs now, your communities are changing all the time, and you have to be changing with them, absolutely. And we cannot, by law, ban pokies, so we must manage them as effectively as possible. So I strongly urge you to have a sinking lid policy.
Thank you.
That's great, thank you. Thanks again, Hugh, for talking to us today.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Right, our next submitter up is Stephen Cox. Good morning, Stephen. Stephen is from Dynamo Cycling and Sports Club Incorporated. How are you this morning? The bell will ding at 7 minutes. If you can wind up before that for questions, which are where the value lies for us, that would be wonderful, but we're in your hands.
Not a problem. Thank you for having me. Not that great at doing these sorts of things, but I'm here particularly, obviously our sports club provides a lot of events within our region, and last year we provided activity for over 10,000 people and 32 event days. I just see the current policy as it is pretty fair. I'm not involved in the industry, but it looks, by what I read, is good. I don't see any need to go reducing the poker machines any further than where they are. It's been mentioned, I see wiretap one form of gambling. I have a extended family member who has been a bad gambler, but that was all done in the security of his own home on his computer. So I just don't see how we can attack one side and not attack across the board. You can take machines away from the local pub, but I don't see you standing outside the casino wanting to take machines out of there who don't contribute as much back to the community as the local bar. I don't see us opposing lotto sales, etc., etc. So I would like it left as it is. For our club, or for me personally, I've been involved chasing money for the last 27 years, putting on events in the city, including World Cup events that were here back in the end of the 90s, early 2000s. Really hard to get sponsorship for the average sporting event. If you're rugby or cricket and you're talking internationals, fine, but you want to put on a cycling event for 300 people that unfortunately costs you a bucket load of money because of central government and stuff like that with traffic management, health and safety. And our club last year in the calendar year spent $100,000 on just meeting some of those needs. Take that away and we'd get by a lot easier. It's, yeah, like I say, you know, we use, or I just don't see how I would replace that gaming funding if it ended blanket, and I know that's not the thing, but I went through the process of the smoke-free, doing away with tobacco sponsorship, and not a smoker and agree with that, but Health Sponsorship Council was set up to replace that. 3 years it lasted, then it was gone. We had a world-class event here in Hamilton with Sinner Smoke Freeze, 3 years, legal obligation was up, it was goodbye. And I gather that's what I worry about down the track, is we keep going down, taking away those things. You know, we also run, apart from cycling events, we run CrossFit. You hire a venue like Mystery Creek, $17,000 or something, I think it cost us for 2 days. You can't just lump that on to the entry fee of people taking part. We've constantly been doing that with other compliance costs. et cetera, et cetera. So I'm just, like I say, really for it being left as it is, because hopefully I'm around for a few more years chasing a bit more money from some of these trusts and providing activities for people in our community and outside of Hamilton, etc. And like I say, I would, if we're going to tackle gambling, let's tackle the whole things. I buy a lotto ticket, I bet on the races once a year for the Melbourne Cup. I've probably spent $20 in a poker machine in my entire life. That's my choice. I'm a little bit worried with just what I heard before, that it's 92% and 8% bad customers, or, you know, gambling addiction. What percentage of that 8%, though, is from poker machines? Or is it online gambling, or is it from the casino? You know? It may only be 1% or maybe 0.5%, you know? Not enough clarity around some of those things for my liking. Like I say, I would like it left it as is and stick with what we've got done. It appears to be working all right to me.
Okay, great, thank you. Stephen, we'll go to questions. Councillor Mallett.
Thank you, Stephen. Good presentation. And interested in your comment about, I think you said a family member who did it in the safety of his own bedroom or something, or in his own home. One of the big issues around this is I think we all agree that gambling will be here whether we like it or not. And the opportunity we have is something around harm minimisation. In this venue, there are at least someone looking there to see what the guy's doing. There's some sort of governance over what happens, as opposed to the gambling is going to happen on your iPhone or on your laptop. So are you coming from a harm minimisation, that at least, I totally understand what a lot of people are going to say, we need the money, we can't get it from anywhere else, totally understand that. And that's going to be ubiquitous across a lot of presenters. But you've sort of hit on the harm. Where is the safer? And it's nothing's perfect, but so you're arguing from it is safer to be in one of these outlets as opposed to where it's going to go anyway if it's not there.
Absolutely, in my opinion. Yeah, absolutely.
And I think Hugh alluded to that too a little bit too. And yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor McPherson.
Thanks, Stephen. You mentioned that we weren't doing anything about casino gambling or standing outside the casino, I think was what you said. Are you aware that councils aren't legally able to have policies controlling or managing casinos?
Yes, I am, but what I'm saying is the fact that, and I'm not here, but Auckland has just had a whole swag more poker machines put in the casino in Auckland, but there's not a lot of protest about that. But we're worried about a site that's got 9 machines versus a site that's got, I don't know, hundreds.
300 and something.
Yeah. And to me, the money that comes back from the local pub with these things that belongs to a trust, I think it's 40%. And like I say, I don't get involved too much in all those details, but I know it's roughly 40% comes back to the community. I know a casino is not obliged to return 40% of their profits to the community.
Yep.
That just makes it a very uneven playing field, in my opinion.
You said there wasn't much protest. There was actually huge protest against the one here, wasn't there?
Yes.
Sorry.
But
questions,
look, the other question I had was you made a point about one of your activities, CrossFit. You said where you hire a venue but you can't just lump the cost of that onto entry fees for people going in. Why not? Other sports and activities have to.
Yeah, I gather there's a limit to what you can continue to charge people to take part in sporting events. So like some of our events, kids under 15, under 17, under 19, you know, and then there's the people who can afford to pay another $25. But for cycling, a lot of those events are week after week after week after week. You start going from $50 to $100 every week. All of a sudden, 5 out of the 10 who were coming are not coming anymore. You know, so there's a limit. It's, you know, it's like hopefully like buying a packet of cigarettes. One day it'll be too expensive for anybody to buy them.
Okay, thanks. Oh, and by the way, 70% of gambling addiction is arising from pokie machine gambling. It's about, you were asking that figure.
Yes, thank you, councillor. That wasn't a question.
Oh, sorry.
Councillor Henry.
Thank you so much for that, Stephen. Look, just one question. You talked about the compliance costs.
Yes.
And do you think they keep going up or they're coming down? They would come down in the future?
Ah, you're kidding me. If you think they're going to go down, no. I cannot see them constantly. I could say, unfortunately, the attitude of some of the people in those places that put conditions on how we can run a road event, on a cycling road event out there, just keep making it harder and harder and harder and more expensive.
Maybe you should put them on some bicycles to see what it's like.
Yes.
Yep.
Yep.
Thank you. That's all.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Stephen, for presenting to us today. We'll break for morning tea. Councillors, can I just, in good faith, remind us that when something is really important to us, we must stick to the process, because these processes are at risk of judicial review. So please keep statements out of it. This is for question time and the public to address us. So that would be helpful. We'll come back at 11. Thank you. Right, welcome back everybody. We'll get started. We do have a quorum in the room. Our next submitter is Jared True. Now, Jared's submitting on behalf of Gambling Machine Association and the Clubs of New Zealand. So we'll do, hi Jared, how are you?
Very good, thank you.
Good. So we'll put those all together. So Jared's got 20 minutes. And we'll just make sure all our devices are going. Jared, you're very familiar with the process. I would suggest you allow quite some time for questions, which will be great, but we are in your hands.
Very good. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm speaking first on behalf of Clubs New Zealand. Clubs New Zealand represents over 300 clubs throughout New Zealand. We're asking Council to retain the status quo policy, which allows club mergers and clubs to relocate. I was intrigued in listening to all the debate before. It seems to be a general debate as to whether we should have more game machines or less game machines. Even if I persuaded you today to get rid of the sinking lid policy and have an open policy, you couldn't do it. All we're really talking about today is, do we allow clubs to merge and do we allow venues to relocate after a fire or a flood? So I'm focusing my presentations on that. So you're looking at removing the provision for clubs to merge. I believe that's counterproductive. If we look at the clubs, the key clubs in Hamilton that are affected by this policy, we've got the Hamilton Combined Return Services Club, 80 machines, the Cosy Club, 80 machines, the Workers with 80 machines, and the Waikato Commerce Club with 14 machines. Your policy at the moment allows those clubs to get together, merge, and go from having 32 to 36 machines down to 24. If your goal was to reduce machine numbers, why would you not want to leave that there and encourage it? Not only does the current policy result in machine numbers reducing and reducing considerably, but it also results in venue numbers reducing. So when we have a club merger, we go from 2 gaming venues down to 1. And what that does is it reduces the accessibility to gambling. So there one local neighbourhood is going to have a gaming venue taken out of it completely. And from a harm minimisation point of view, and if your goal was to reduce machine numbers and reduce venues, keeping the current policy in fact does that. Again, counterproductive to change it. Club mergers are positive. It's much better that we have one strong club in our city that can provide great facilities and benefits to its members than have 2 struggling clubs. And don't kid yourself, gaming machines are very, very important to clubs. They're a very important financial part of the club. The reality is you're not going to get 2 clubs to merge if they're not going to be able to take some of their game machines with them. That's just the cold, hard reality. When we've seen clubs that merge, what we see is we see improved harm minimisation. We see a strong club that's able to employ dedicated, experienced staff to monitor and supervise a gaming room. You're better off to have 24 machines in one spot, looked after by trained specialist staff, than have 2 18-machine venues, struggling clubs run by volunteers and part-time people. We will also see our larger clubs build an excellent relationship with the Department of Internal Affairs. The Hamilton Workingmen's Club would be a key candidate for a club merger. They've got an excellent relationship with the Department of Internal Affairs. If they were to put their hand up for a brand new 3-year licence, which is the Gold Star rating, they would be a club that would achieve it. Our larger clubs also have an excellent working relationship with the Health Promotion Agency, who helps with harmonisation, and also the local treatment providers. You don't get that level of relationship building and networking when you've got smaller fractured clubs. Enabling club mergers is also important in relation to encouraging better land use. We have got a housing crisis, and I believe council should be doing absolutely everything it can in its power to make housing more affordable for people. What we've got is we've got a number of our large key Hamilton clubs on large blocks of land, which would be absolutely ideal for high density residential housings. And that's what you have when you have a club merger, when you have two come together. This is the Hamilton Cosmopolitan Club site. That would be ideal for high density affordable housing, nice and close to the CBD. The Glenview Club, absolutely perfect. Peacocks Road, perfect again for residential housing. Waikato Commerce Club, if that club was to merge with another large club and have the machines located more centrally, that land would be ideal for high density affordable housing. Not allowing the clubs to take the machines just entrenches those clubs where they are. You may be concerned with the floodgates. If we keep on allowing this club merger provision, we're going to end up with a whole range of 24 machine venues in our city, and it's going to be horrific. It's not going to happen. The merger provisions have been in place since February 2007. There's only a small number of clubs that qualify. We're likely to result in 1, maybe 2 in the next 10, 15 years of clubs actually taking up this provision. They need to be long established clubs. And this club merger provision is only available for clubs, not pubs. So we're not going to see floodgates. Your current policy is consistent with other councils. Most other councils allow club mergers because they see the logic of it. We have a very left-leaning Auckland council that is very anti-gaming machines. It's got a strict sinking lid policy, absolutely no relocations. But even Auckland Council sees the wisdom of allowing club mergers because it results in less venues and less machines. The current provisions are consistent with the Act. The Gambling Act expressly allows clubs to merge and to have more than 18 machines, again, because the government sees the logic from having machines in one spot, highly supervised. The current provision is also, in fact, consistent with your sinking lid policy. If you have 2 18-machine clubs, you've got 36 machines. If you allow them to merge, they go from 36 machines down to 24. It takes 12 machines out of the system. Totally consistent with your current policy. And interestingly enough, the current club merger provisions were put in place after a full public consultation. I remember vividly sitting right there in February 2017 when we used to have the boards up here with the green lights and the red lights indicating who was voting for it. And there was one councillor that was particularly wise, considered that he knew a lot about gaming machines. He's a little bit older, a little bit more grumpier now, judging by his Twitter account at night time. But that councillor was Councillor McPherson, who in fact voted in favour of the club merger provision. Didn't you, Dave?
Sorry, just don't address, hang on, please, Jared, don't address the individual members.
No, just been cheeky. I recall vividly being here at 8:30 at night, and even Councillor McPherson saw the logic and the merits in allowing the club merger provisions and voted for them when they came into place. So, welcome your questions. There you go, 7 minutes to the dot.
That's fantastic, Jared, thank you. So questions first for Jared on that submission. Councillor McPherson.
And can I thank Jared for following my Twitter account? And definitely grumpier sometimes. Jared, your premise about the club merger was that it would make it really difficult if they weren't allowed to take their pokie machines with them. Is that a fair summation of that?
Yep. As you and I know, Dave, clubs aren't allowed to use gaming machines as their primary source of income. But the reality is that even though it might not be the primary source of income, it's a very close second.
Good, because I was going to ask that question, and you've acknowledged that already. Yeah. So if it's not allowed to be the primary source of income, why should that stop clubs merging? They can merge anyway, regardless of whether they take or don't take their pokie machines.
Yeah, you look at any of those clubs' balance sheet, it will be the gaming revenue will be at least 40% of their revenue. You take away 40% of their revenue, it just doesn't become viable. Full stop.
So pokie machines is propping up the clubs.
The cold hard reality is that game machines prop up, keep afloat 90–95% of clubs in New Zealand. That's the reality. Okay. If you took game machines out of all our clubs in Hamilton, very few, apart from say like the Hamilton Workmen's Club, would last more than 12 months.
So that might be the only one you're thinking.
The Hamilton Workmen's Club is a sensational club. It's a standout above all the other clubs in New Zealand. It would be in the top 3 clubs. And the reality is if there was to be a club merger, the machines would probably go there. And Ken has got an excellent working relationship with the DIA, excellent working relationship with Health Promotion Agency people. They've got fantastic harm and procedures in place. If the machines went there, that would be fantastic.
So it would be fair to say then that apart from that example, the other clubs are in a sense addicted to pokie machine gambling, the revenue they get from it.
The reality is that just like the vast majority of clubs in New Zealand, if you took away their game machine revenue, just like any business where you took away 40% of your revenue stream, it would struggle to survive.
Thanks, Jared.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Southgate.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just one question in respect to the club mergers. You showed us some useful topographical maps. So you understand how many clubs there are and you understand what conversations going on potentially for mergers. So has there been any analysis done in terms of if all of the clubs that could merge with another did, what the overall impact that would be to both A, the viability of those clubs, and B, the numbers of gaming machines, or can that data be got? I mean, I know it's all speculation. We don't know who's merging.
Yeah, so we know how many gaming machines we'd have. We would know if 2 clubs merged, we have a maximum of 24 machines, and we know that's going to reduce the machine numbers. As far as the logic of it, in a heartbeat, you can tell that clubs merging in Hamilton is logical financially, and it's logical from a sustainable point of view. The issue that you have with encouraging them to do it is really just a political issue with dealing with committees.
Right.
But over time, we're seeing that more and more.
So those conversations are occurring?
The club merger concept is in the back of a large number of the club's minds, absolutely. Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Councillor Henry.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Look, just a question. You talked about the strict sinking lid in Auckland policy, but then I hear Sky City has put in 350 new machines into their new building. Yep. Now, in Hamilton, the same could the same happen if we're merging the clubs, so there's less and less poking machine, but then Sky City could put another 200 in there if they build some more stories up and so on. Yeah. So what are we achieving here? I mean,
well, yeah, I don't see the connection there. One, our policy only relates to non-casino game machines, yes. So we've got no control of it. And I think very much that the Auckland scenario was a one-off scenario.
Okay.
It was a trade-off for building a massive convention centre.
Okay.
And I can't see something like that getting built here, and certainly not under the current government that ever being allowed, no.
Okay. So. Thank you so much.
Great. So on to your next one, Jared. Thank you.
Don't have to introduce myself. That's good.
So now we are moving on to the Machine Association of New Zealand. So that will be on your list.
Right, so I also represent the Game Machine Association of New Zealand. That's an organisation that represents 85% of New Zealand's gaming machine societies and venues, and also RSAs and other clubs. We're asking you again to retain the status quo relocation provisions and to retain the club merger provisions. So the current policy has only just been implemented. We've had the current policy that allows venues to relocate was put into place after 2 comprehensive public consultation processes. I remember the then Councillor King, sitting right there, talking to the staff afterwards and being outraged by the amount that they'd spent having a second full round of public consultation, given that we'd already had one relocation discussion and Council saw it so important to tweak that relocation provision and expand it further. We ended up having a second round of public consultation at great cost to the ratepayer. And now here we are again, only a very short period after that, looking to have another round of consultation. I think you should just simply leave the policy as is, let it run its full 3-year term, and then review the data after that 3 years. I think it's a knee-jerk reaction. I don't think it's based on evidence or policy. I think it's based on personal views which aren't backed by the evidence. If you're looking at removing the relocation provision, this is totally contrary to the national trend. You would be the first council in New Zealand to look at removing a relocation policy. Over the last 3 years, almost every other council has in fact adopted a relocation policy in some form or the other. At the moment, we have about 45 councils that have relocation policies in place, and that number would be higher if we had every single council actually review their policy in that cycle. You've got to remember why the government allowed venues to relocate and keep their machine numbers. It was a harm minimisation tool. It was put in place by the Maori Party as part of the Gambling Harm Reduction Amendment Bill. And the logic behind allowing relocation is we allow venues to move out of high deprivation areas to more appropriate areas like the CBD, out of residential areas to more appropriate areas like the CBD. So what you're proposing is counterproductive. Wouldn't it be a good thing to allow a venue such as the 5 Crossroads Sports Bar to move to the CBD? Your current policy allows that. You're looking at banning that. If you ban it, it just entrenches that venue in its unsuitable current spot. Allowing relocation is also a health and safety issue. Why do we want to stop venues moving out of earthquake-prone buildings? Why do we want our kids working in these venues, the public going to these venues, and they've been dangerous? Why do we want to stop gaming venues moving out of dangerous buildings or unsanitary buildings? Your policy expressly allows them to do that. Limited circumstances allows them to do it. It's fair and reasonable. Why are we looking to stop that? If we don't allow relocation out of those sort of venues, they're not going to just disappear. They're just going to entrench themselves and stay in those unsuitable locations. I went to the last 2 rounds where we adopted a relocation provision and then expanded it. The discussion was that this is just simply fair and reasonable. Councillors, when they were having that discussion, said, look, we don't want to penalise business owners further when they've already been kicked in the guts because there's been a fire, a flood or an earthquake. What we'll do, it's fair and reasonable if they're subject to something like that, to allow them to move across the road and to carry on their existing business. It's also fair and reasonable to allow venues to relocate a short distance when they've lost their premises due to no fault of their own, such as public works acquisition or lease termination due to site redevelopment. Again, housing affordability. We've got a number of clubs on large blocks of land. Even if the club didn't do a club merger, there is the ability to relocate to new, smaller premises. That would in fact be positive. It's currently allowed under the policy. It enables those large blocks of land, valuable blocks of land, to be used for high density, affordable housing. Allowing relocation also creates a vibrant Hamilton. If we allow relocation, it allows business owners to invest and to move to new modern premises. It revitalises our business district, improves our local economy, encourages tourism and creates employment. This was the Te Rapa Tavern. The owners of the Te Rapa Tavern were able to spend $3 million and it was a viable business case because they could relocate and take their 80 machines. This is the first venue in New Zealand to relocate under the new relocation provisions. It went from this to that. Fantastic. This is what you're looking at banning. It went from this, pretty old and run down, to a nice new modern sports bar. Vibrant. Why are we saying to our business owners, no, you can't rebuild, you can't redevelop your premises? If you take away the ability to relocate, we're going to see more and more landlords extorting venues. What landlords know that if you've got game machines, it's a valuable part of your business. If you can't relocate across the road to new premises, that results in 2 things. The landlord puts the rent up above market rental, and you also get unreasonable terms imposed on you. And the poor business owner, not being able to move, has got no choice. The current relocation provisions limit that ability for venue operators to be extorted. Relocation also enables our valuable community funding to be kept sustainable. And this is hugely important. These are the organisations that we're talking about that benefit from the funding. We're talking about our rugby clubs, our cricket clubs. We're talking like fantastic facilities like the Peak Centre out at Rotorua. We're talking about cycling, schools, rescue helicopters. I noticed that Taupo at the moment is looking at losing their rescue helicopter because of the result of less and less funds. Hate for Hamilton to be in a similar situation. Fantastic public events like Balloons Over Waikato, and even the Riding for Disabled people benefit from these funding. Relocation also helps to keep this funding sustainable and helps to see those valuable community groups continue. Welcome your questions.
Thank you, Jared. Councillor McPherson.
Jared, you talked about or criticised the proposed policy change for not allowing relocation of venues out of suburbs into the CBD, pretty much your words, I think. Would you support a policy that did allow relocation only in that event of relocation from suburban areas into the CBD precinct?
Yeah, some councils have got that provision. Some councils will say we'll allow relocation, but you need to prove to us that it's going from a high deprivation area to a low deprivation area. Or some councils will say we'll allow relocation, but it needs to be from a residential type area to a CBD type area. I think those policies are sensible. I think that's the intention behind the relocation provisions. Other policies will simply say we'll allow relocation, but it's on a pure case-by-case basis. You front up to council, you tell us your circumstances. If we think overall it will result in something better for our city, we'll allow it on a case-by-case basis. I think that sort of policy would be sensible also. Okay. Banning it altogether, not sensible.
Okay. And you talked about how it was unreasonable to not allow a relocation of a authorised site in the event of fire or flood or earthquake. But don't we have isn't there a legally allowable suspension of operations for 6 months? So if there's a fire in a building and they're having to rebuild it, they can wait 6 months and still keep their licence?
You can apply to the Department of Internal Affairs for additional time to rebuild after an event like a fire. But the reality is when you see venues that are badly damaged like that, they tend to be in larger type venues. And the modern market tends to be, if you want to rebuild a venue, it's logical to go to a newer, smaller premise, as opposed to rebuild an old tavern-style type premise.
Except in the case of Te Rapa Tavern, the pictures you showed us went the other way, didn't it?
I think if we took into account the footprint of the old Te Rapa Tavern, including the significantly large car park, and then we look at that footprint, it would in fact be an example of a business moving from a large block of land to a smaller block of land.
Not the building, though.
But you look at a large number of examples. Pubs are struggling. We've got the drink driving rules, the smoking laws, etc. The modern concept is a small sports bar concept, rather than an old school massive tavern with huge car parking because no one drives to the pub anymore. I think it's positive that we have hospitality venues that are smaller, that are small, vibrant centres. And I think we should be encouraging that in our policy, not entrenching them in these big, old, rundown premises. Mm-hmm. But smaller venues, easier to monitor.
Happy enough if it was in concentrated sort of centres, commercial centres, let's say.
Well, that's pretty much what your policy does anyway at the moment, to a certain extent, because it says, yes, you're allowed to relocate, but it's only got to be in a gambling permitted area. Honestly, I think if you were serious about harm minimisation, you'd be expanding your relocation provisions, not shrinking it. You'd be saying, righto, we've got all these venues that are in areas like Frankton and Five Crossroads. Why don't we allow them to move to more affluent areas like Rotorua? I'd be expanding your relocation provision if you're actually serious about harm minimisation.
The Five Crossroads one is a relatively recent addition since the Act came in, is it not?
No, it's been there for a wee while.
Since after 2003.
Yeah, well, it's been there for a decade plus.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Henry.
Just one question. I just saw the different pictures of the Te Rapa Tavern before and after, which is quite and I just wondered, has there been any data on does it attract different clientele? Do they use it differently now than they used it before?
Very, very, very good question, and very astute of you to ask that. We had and I'll give you an example we had in Petone, where we had an old school pub where you and I wouldn't go to, where people wore black singlets and white gumboots. That was a very, very high turnover gaming venue. That venue got $3-4 million spent on it, became quite a nice restaurant, quite a nice sports bar, sort of similar to the Te Rapa Tapin type style. And we saw our gaming revenue drop in half because it resulted in a slightly more affluent type of market. So again, if you're going to allow these venues to relocate and invest like this, you'll actually see a reduction in the actual gaming spend, despite the machine numbers staying there probably.
But the spend will go up in other areas like food and so on,
well, we don't
so
know
they
that.
can still survive.
Yeah, we don't know that.
Okay.
If people don't spend money on gaming, they're not necessarily going to buy bread for the kids. It probably gets spent on drugs or alcohol or other things.
Yeah, no, just within. I just thought within the club that they will still survive even with the gambling going down because of the new venue and the new clientele.
In the club environment,
Yeah.
You're dealing with the same people, because when we're talking about a club merger, we're talking about two groups of clubs coming together, so the clientele stays the same. In a sports bar environment, where you go from an old environment like the old rundown Te Rapa Tavern to a new modern environment, you tend to attract a different clientele which doesn't tend to spend as much money on gaming machines.
Fair enough. Thank you. Lovely. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Andrew.
Following up on Councillor Siggy's questions, why would anybody move from a low social deprivation area into an affluent area when they know that their income is going to fall off? And from what we're seeing right now, we know that 5 Crossroads is allowed to move into town, but they haven't. I mean, it speaks for itself. Isn't your argument...
It's a matter of giving...
Excuse me, I haven't finished. Isn't your argument counter to what you're trying to prove?
No.
Thank you.
I think if you ban it, you just take this option out. If venues are thinking about relocating, this is sort of a long-term plan. They're not necessarily thinking about this every week. It's like when your lease comes up for renewal, when you've got a leaking roof and you've got to spend a whole lot of money doing it, it's those stages you go, okay, am I better off to move to somewhere new and modern, or am I better off sticking it out here? And I think we're seeing now more and more venues that are in tough neighbourhoods actually really looking seriously at relocating, because we're seeing the number of armed robberies increase, and we're seeing venues that are in those tough areas finding it really, really difficult to get staff, and they're really concerned about the health and safety issues of armed robberies, because gaming venues are getting targeted big time for armed robberies. And once you've had a shotgun in your face 3 or 4 times, you get a bit sick of it, and you look, what's the options here to move? So if you're then moving to like a CBD area, which is going to be safer, we're seeing more and more venues want to look at this option. If you take it away from them, they're simply not going to be able to do it. So I don't think there's any harm leaving it in there.
So that's a really fair-based proposition you've just put up. So why haven't we seen one club or one venue move from a low socio deprivation area into the CBD?
I think over the next 10 years we will see more of it if it's available to people.
But it is available right now, and we haven't seen one move.
Well, no, it's only been available since, 2015, when the policy was put in place.
So the floodgates didn't open, did they? Nobody's moved because they're making more, and it's,
so
as you said yourself,
the public
that's because more
consultation
money's coming
was
in.
available in November 2015, so it wouldn't have been until early 2016 that this was available.
Yep.
And business owners are working on a lease cycle. So if you've got a 3-year lease and you're halfway through it, you're not going to be looking at relocating next week. You've got to wait till your lease comes to an end and then look at relocating. Well, so the policies are only been in place for a heartbeat.
So your staff are getting shotguns put in their face. We've had 2 years to move, but nobody has yet.
Well, again, it's going to depend on a range of factors, including a lease cycle. No one's going to move when they've got another 1.5 to 2 years worth of rent to pay and move to somewhere else and end up paying 2 lots of rent. But when their lease comes to an end, or when it's due to be renewed and they've got an option of leaving, if you keep the current policy, that becomes a viable option for people to consider. So take it away, they don't.
Final question. You believe it's got nothing to do with the fact that their income is far higher in low socioeconomic areas. They haven't moved. The shotgun's being put in people's faces. 2 years we've had an opening. Right now, the door could close, but nobody's still moving.
I can tell you from experience in Auckland that the number of
We're
inquiries...
talking about Hamilton. We're talking about Hamilton. The door's open
I'm
right
talking
now for
about
people to
the
move.
experience of venues that have been subject to armed robbery. Every fortnight I get a call now from venues in Auckland saying, look, it's just getting too tough, we want to relocate, how do we go about relocating? And I think we'll see that in Hamilton as well.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And final questions, Councillor Bunting.
Look, I couldn't let this one go without just probing a little bit deeper. You made an assertion there that people aren't, if you take them away, people aren't suddenly going to spend their money on bread, but they're going to spend it on booze and drugs. What do you base that on? And can you just back that up a wee bit? Or
I think it followed on from the comment of the earlier submitter that if we take gaming machines away from people and we're concerned that certain parents aren't putting food on their table and they're spending money on other things, I don't think we're going to make bad parents instantly good parents by taking away gaming machines. I think the money might get spent on junk food or other vices.
Right, so what I'm really interested in research on that, and I'm not trying to be tricky, I'm just really trying to explore this.
Yeah, I haven't got any research to quote you. I just don't think that taking away 9 gaming machines out of a pub makes a parent that's inherently a bad parent and that doesn't care for their children instantly a good parent.
All right. So our previous submitter who said access to harm, does that bear any relevance to that? Isn't taking away, would that sway your thinking?
I don't really think that the access argument's huge now because everyone's got a smartphone that's connected to the internet and everyone can gamble online, and the online spending's just going through the roof.
All right. Thank you.
Great. Finished bang on time. Thank you very much, Jared. Appreciate it. Right, committee, we are up to the next submitter, which is Hamilton and Group Riding for the Disabled, and we have Jeanette and Kathy. Oh no, we have Jim. Good morning. Yes, it is still morning. Good morning, Jim. You have 10 minutes, Jim. The bell will go at 7, so that will allow 3 minutes for questions from elected members. So we're in your hands.
I don't think I'm going to need that long.
We like to hear that.
Yeah, just representing the RDA along with quite a few other organisations that I'm involved with that all relying to a certain extent on gaming revenue from gaming machines. Regarding the RDA, the submission that they've made, I guess you've all got that in front of you, but is the approach to the policy that the council to make the new venue consent clear, and the answer is yes. There will be no venue consents created under the new policy. Now, we find that over a period of time, the revenue from the existing ones and the ones that are left is going to diminish dramatically, and that's going to have a huge effect on our opportunities to continue with what we're doing. Hamilton Group of the RDA have got something like 130 clients that we service every week, and if we've got to reduce our funding, or if we get a reduction in our funding, it's going to have a huge effect on those people. Some people criticise us by saying, well, why don't we up the fees? But the people that we're concerned with have only got a very limited source of income because they're all disabled in some way. So our business really is absolutely reliant on funding from outside sources, and it's not just the gaming machines, but gaming machines do have quite a big effect on our business. Yeah, that's from the RDA point of view. I can't think of anything else really to say. It's just that we are reliant on that source of income. Any questions?
Great, thanks, Jim. Questions? Yes, Councillor Mallett.
Thank you, Jim, for your presentation, and just let you know that my daughter was a client of yours a few years ago, so thank you very, very much for your help. Are you concerned because the council itself actually has a small community funding process and some money available? I'm interested in your comment. Now I've bloody lost it.
Can we come back to you,
No,
Councillor?
the comment is that will council be prepared to provide the funding that will be lost if there are no pokie machines? So would your group, if you lost your funding from pokie machines, obviously you're going to look elsewhere, and I assume one of those, or do you know that you could seek funding from the council?
We do seek funding from the council already. In fact, I would suggest that every year we put in applications to every organisation in the Waikato that does funding that covers our type of business.
So would it be a concern for you that somewhere along the line, if the pokie money is not available, the demand for other funders will grow to the extent that you may find that your funding is cut because council doesn't have an unlimited, and none of the other funders have an unlimited budget, do they?
Well, we're pretty sure of that will happen.
I think that's... All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor McPherson.
Thanks, Jim. You made the point several times that you and some other organisations you're involved in rely on, you said to a certain extent, on the income from pokies or from pokie trusts. And you're concerned about that this policy will mean that there'll be less available. What makes you think that will happen?
Because the pokie machines are going to diminish over a period of time with the policy that the way we understand the policy that you've got in place or that you're going to implement.
Has the money from pokie trusts that RDA gets diminished over the last 15 years from pokie trusts?
Dramatically.
Dramatically.
Yep.
Yet the amount distributed in Hamilton, are you aware that it's remained relatively static over that period? The overall amount, not the amount you're getting.
Yeah, I understand that, and I know that that's happening because all the organisations that I'm involved with have had the reduction in income from gaming machine, excuse me, gaming trusts. But there's so many other organisations that are applying for that same amount of funding. Well, there's probably less funding because of the amount of work that's being done. There's probably maybe less gambling going on, but yeah, no, there's a...
So it's been spread more thinly than it was when you started, sort of thing?
Definitely.
Okay. But that's not being caused necessarily by the rundown in pokie machines, just by more groups needing it?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. A few years ago, 5 or 6, the minimum amount that a pokie trust had to return to the community went up from 33% to 42% and caused an increase in the amount being available in Hamilton and other areas. Do you think that it might help your group if the minimum requirement for return from pokie trusts went up to, say, 50% of their earnings as opposed to the current 42 or even higher?
What year did that limit go up?
I don't know, but it was 5 or 6. It was after we first started these policies, somewhere in the last 10 years.
Yeah, I can't really answer that. I believe that if that came in, there would be less. The trusts wouldn't be able to function the way they are.
So they need the current 58% of their income they're getting just to run themselves.
I would suggest so.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Henry.
Thank you so much, Jim, for this. And I just want to say thank you to RDA because my daughter was volunteering for many years there. So that was great. Look, just a question is, I mean, if you lost quite a bit of that pokie money, how would that impact on the clients that you can look after?
At the present time, we've got 12 horses that we've got to maintain at an average of around about $2,000 a year. We've got to have them for the number of clients that we service at the moment. So that's the initial thing. The other thing is we're employing a manager coach, an assistant coach, a horse person that looks after the horse person, and a yard person That's all wages that are going out. Now, if any of that income drops so that we can't maintain our horses or our staff, then we're going to have to reduce the number of clients that we service.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jim. Very clear submission. Right.
Thank you.
Elected members, somehow I've lost 10 minutes. I don't know how I did that. I must have given Mr. True 30 minutes instead of 20.
Come back.
No. No. Yeah, I thought we were doing very, very well. So I do apologise for those submitters waiting. Our next submitter is New Zealand Community Trust. Tanya. Good morning, Tanya. The bell will ring at 7 minutes. If you can wrap up earlier, because the value for us, of course, is in the questions.
Yeah, certainly. Good morning, everybody. My name is Tanya Pegis, and I'm representing New Zealand Community Trust today. I've just got a few slides to run through today, which will just highlight the main points of our submission. But just before I start, I'd just like to clarify some of the numbers that have been quoted earlier, which weren't quite right. The gaming trusts have to return 40% of their money to the community, and that's gone up from 37.12% in the last couple of years. So that's the minimum return. About 26% of our income goes back to the government in taxes and levies. 16% goes out to our venues to cover their costs for managing gaming machines. So actually the smallest chunk of the revenue that we have, which is about 15%, goes to NZCT to allow us to run our business. To allow us to run our business, so pay salaries, pay for our building and so forth. So it's actually only about 15% is what's retained by the trust to manage their business. Okay, so in New Zealand, gambling is a mainstream, widespread and socially accepted activity. About 80% of Kiwis regularly participate in gambling for entertainment. We know this from Ministry of Health figures. And about 37% of those people regularly use gaming machines. The Class 4 gambling sector, of which we're part, is regulated very heavily by the Department of Internal Affairs to protect the interests of the community. We have because of this regulation and the Gambling Act 2003, we have a high level of transparency, good governance and best practice when it comes to harm minimisation, of which there are a raft of regulations that we have to comply with. And all these are on behalf of protecting the community. Problem gambling currently affects only 0.3% of the adult population of this country. And as you can see from the graph here, the gaming machine numbers have been declining since, what number have we got here, 2003, when the machines were at just over 25,000, and coming down to 2017, and in fact now in 2018, we're below 15,700 machines approximately at the moment, so they've gone down by almost 10,000 over that period of the last 15 years or so. Over that time, though, however, problem gambling rates haven't really changed. The average has been 0.5% the whole way through that time. So it's varied from 0.3 to 0.7% and is currently 0.3. So we can see no relationship between the number of gaming machines and the problem gambling rate, and there is no data to back up a correlation between the two things. One of the things that I mentioned before was that we pay a lot of taxes and levies to the government, and a big chunk of the money that we pay is the problem gambling levy. And over the last 5 years or so, that's amounted to around $100 million from across the gambling sector, including Class 4. And that goes to the Ministry of Health to pay for their intervention programs, their research, their counselling services and so forth. So the sector makes a big contribution to that. Just for NZCT and Hamilton, we returned over $280,000 directly to Hamilton last year, and that's pretty much average for what we return every year. And then we also make regional grants that go to the wider region that also have benefits to Hamilton as well. And we understand that, that gambling venue policies are a balancing act for councils, and we understand why you might want to remove the the relocation policy from your current policy. However, as I've mentioned before, the 9,000 gaming machines have already disappeared under public pressure. In fact, it's closer to 10,000 now. And that's reduced the funding that we're able to return to the community by approximately $60 million compared to what was available in 2003 as to what we have now. So reducing gaming machines over that period hasn't reduced problem gambling, as we saw from the graph before, but it has reduced the community funding. And that will continue to happen if gaming machine numbers keep declining. That's a fact. Relocations are positive for your community and for the council. They help to reduce harm from problem gambling because they allow venues to relocate out of high deprivation areas. If you remove that relocation policy, then those gaming machines are just going to get entrenched where they are, and any attempts to try and reduce problem gambling in those areas is going to be a lot harder because those machines are just going to stay there. It supports the local hospitality businesses and jobs by allowing relocations because it means venues, as I know Jared has mentioned, can move to different premises. They can relocate to where they are. They can move to areas where they can expand, or they can have employ more jobs and maintain a good hospitality hub for the city. They also allow the council to respond to future demands such as urban growth, rezoning, demographic changes. If you have no flexibility in your policy, then you're reducing your own options for allowing growth in the city. And they allow the appropriate benefit and responsibility to be apportioned. Landlords have no responsibility for harm minimisation. That rests on the venue. So there's no relationship between the building owner and the necessity for harm minimisation. The landlords don't basically care what goes on in their buildings because it's the venue operators that are running the machines. And so for these reasons, most councils have a relocation clause in their policies. I think there's only 4 or 5 currently that don't since the new provision came in 2013. So we think this would be very much a backward step for council to take, both for your own reasons and for problem gambling. So that's my presentation. I'm very happy to answer any questions.
We'll have questions. Thank you. Councillor McPherson.
Thanks. Thanks, Tanya, for those figures. I just had a quick look at your most recent annual report and see that just over 16 million is kept by your organisation for operational expenses, staff and machines and so forth. How many staff has your organisation got?
We currently have, I think, 39 full-time employees 39, around the country.
And the actual office operational cost, less than not getting machines, is 6 point something or other million. So
yes, it would be something like that. Yeah, that would be our operating costs.
Thanks. The 280,000, I think it was that figure, right? It was returned to Hamilton City Council area, or it's a bit hard. I know sometimes because groups across boundaries and that. How much was spent in Hamilton in your the machines that you own and the clubs and pubs here?
I don't have that figure, I'm afraid, but I could get that for you if you wanted it. We actually don't have very many machines here in Hamilton.
I'm aware of that. Yeah.
Sorry, I don't know what our expenditure is off the top of my head.
Would it be more than the 280,000? Do you think, or?
Well, yeah, of course, because like I say, that only represents 40% of the income from the machines. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Mallett.
Thank you, Tanya. Thanks for the breakdown of the figures. So am I right in saying from this thing here that for every dollar that goes into a pokie machine, 91% goes back to the person who put the money in? Well,
yeah,
on
right.
Average, sorry. I mean
yes,
on average,
I'll show you that graph on the screen. Yeah, 91% is returned to players in prizes. So for every dollar that goes into a machine, roughly 91% comes back out.
So the 9 cents that's left is what we're talking about.
Yeah,
so that's 9 cents
gaming
that's
machine
left
proceeds. Yeah,
gets split between the government.
Yeah.
And that's tax?
Yeah, 26% of that is tax and levies. Okay. Yeah, the 40% is the return to the community. 16% roughly to our venues to cover their costs, and then the rest is our operating costs, which is about 15-16%.
Thank you. And earlier, Sabinta said that the rent, is it correct that now the venues get I always thought they were based on a flat rent per machine. Now I understand, and this is what the earlier presenter said, was that no, that's not the case now. They get a cut of the 9 cents.
Yeah, it's a commission-based payment, but it's capped.
Okay.
Yeah, it can't be more than...
But it is supposed to be to maintain the machines
it is
and
it's to cover their costs of running the machine, so the electricity, staff costs, and so forth. Yeah, it's not to make a profit.
Yeah, okay. And I think this is the figure that Dave got from you. The 15% is the running cost of the trust.
Yep.
So that's your governance and your staff and
Yep,
meeting all your regulatory carry on and whatnot.
Yeah,
okay,
that's right.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Southgate.
Yeah, I'm just interested in the harm done versus the community benefit gained. The only analysis of that you've done is around the money spent into the communities, or because your slide showed that despite the number of machines going down, that gambling, problem gambling, has been affected. So, you know, just trying to get my head around, because the number of SMITers there's two sides to the story. What is the community benefit gained versus the number of people that are actually harmed by?
Well, if you look at, I mean, $330 million goes back to the community every year, roughly, from Class 4. That, I mean, the number of, so the 0.3% of people who are problem gamblers, I think works out to about 66,000 people across the country. If you look at the number of people that benefit from, say, being members of sports clubs, I mean, you could probably have 66,000 people in one city like Hamilton or Rotorua benefiting from those clubs that we support. So it's hard to make a very accurate comparison to say, okay, well, you know, this number of people benefit from the money, but if you look at the kind of money that's going back in the 330 million, the vast number of organisations that it benefits, we made grants to almost 2,000 organisations just last year, and each of those 2,000 organisations has probably got an average of, even if it was only 100 members, you've already got 200,000 people that are already benefiting from that money. So.
Okay, super speedy. Last question. Has anybody done any work on the impact of other forms of digital gambling on the demand for the machines, the number of the hours used at the machines and that sort of thing?
No, that work hasn't been done yet. I mean, we're still hoping that somebody is going to do that work. It's something we're trying to press the Department of Internal Affairs to look into, because they have the data and the means to be able to do that. So we are hoping for it, but there is some data from overseas that's coming through that's showing that the rise in online is massive in countries like Australia, particularly the UK, Canada. There's been some work done, and they say that the problem gambling rate is 10 times higher online for people gambling online than it is for people gambling in like our gaming rooms, where there's regulations in place, there's people watching out for them, there's trained staff. Online, you've got no protection whatsoever. You're sitting there in your living room with something. You know, you can play with a credit card which you can't do in our gaming rooms. I mean, there's a whole raft of issues with online gambling, and that is something we see is it's only going to grow in this country.
Just interested in that as an emerging issue. But
Okay, we are severely running over time, so please keep the questions, and if you could keep your answers a little more concise, that would be helpful to other submitters. Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Concise questions, have an open one. I want to talk to your slide, problem gambling affects only 0.3. You quote the National Gambling Study and the DIA statistics. We have a submission from the Waikato DHB, also basing its findings on the New Zealand 2012 National Gambling Study. It says 0.7 people were problem gamblers, which is over double what you're quoting, where you say only 0.3. 1.8 moderate gamblers, low risk gamblers, 11.5% people argue because of gambling, 8% went without something they needed because of gambling. Applied to Hamilton's population size, these stats suggest at least 25% of the population are negatively impacted by some level of gambling. So they're using the same study, right? You're claiming only 0.3%. Those figures that they're staying from the same study seem dramatically different.
No, that 0.3% is actually from the 2014 preliminary figures from the same study, so that's actually a more recent set of numbers. So the 2014 study says 0.3%.
It's a bit unclear. What do you define by that as problem? You know, the 0.3. I'm just trying to tease that figure.
Those people who are classified as problem gamblers, so they have sought help from a counselling service. Yes, I mean there is a gradation from low risk through medium risk, high risk to problem gamblers, which means that a larger group of people are potentially at risk, but those are the 0.3% is people who've actually been classified as problem gamblers.
I have an open mind, and I respect for your submission, but I just want to suggest that I think that particular figure probably, to a degree, I just ask you to revisit that.
Well, that's come from the Ministry of Health, so.
You say only 0.3 yet. I mean, I think obviously we'll ask DHB the same question, I assure you. Thank you.
Councillor Bunting.
In the interest of time, I can ask offline. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Mayor Andrew.
9% return to players. What is the international figures?
So, sorry, for what?
For every dollar, that 91%, your graph up here,
yeah.
What are the international comparisons?
They would be much the same, I think. We probably return a higher rate in New Zealand to gamblers, but in prizes, but I couldn't tell you what the overseas figures are for the same thing, but yeah, sorry, I don't know.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. I just have a question. In your written submission, Tanya, you talk about, and Councillor Southgate's touched on it a little bit, you talk about the unregulated threat of online gambling. And you have indicated, you answered my question in part, you have indicated that you're asking and lobbying Internal Affairs to do that work. Is there any work overseas that have a look at in terms of the harm caused by online gambling, which seems to be largely unregulated versus being in a venue that you know of? Yeah, sure. There is a study I've quoted in my submission, which is from Canada. And that's the one that says that they did do a study and said that problem gambling rates are 10 times higher for online gamblers than they are for gaming room gamblers. You did. Yep. That's right. Thank you. Thank you very much. Look, thank you for an excellent submission. Thank you. Thank you. Right, the next submitter is Rowan West from Netball Waikato and Bay of Plenty. Good. It's still good morning. Good morning, Rowan.
Good morning, Councillor.
You know the drill. Bell will go at 7 minutes and allow time for 3 minutes for questions.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to make the verbal submission today on behalf of Netball Waikato Bay of Plenty. Gaming trusts contribute $580,000 in direct revenue to Netball Waikato Bay of Plenty and another $70,000 indirectly via Netball New Zealand. This equates to 22% of our total revenue. By any stretch of the imagination, that's a significant proportion of an organisation's revenue. 100% of these funds go to supporting grassroots and community netball, and across our zone that is 26,000 players, coaches, umpires and volunteers. In Hamilton City alone, that is over 10,000 players, coaches, umpires and volunteers. In 2017, 70% of those funds went to staff costs for my organisation, helping employ 16 people, 14 of which were women, 7 of which were Māori. Another 30% of those funds, or the balance 30% of those funds, went to local businesses who supply us with goods and services. Via Netball, Gaming Trust funding creates sporting and professional development opportunities for females across Hamilton and the Waikato. As a sport for every woman, we have a higher prevalence of lower socioeconomic groups and Pacifica women involved in our game. Of our 26,000 participants, 40% are Māori. Any decrease in Gaming Trust funding would disproportionately impact those people. What about replacement of funds if this policy was in place and a few years we see a decrease in the funds coming from gaming trusts? Well, I would ask the question, will the Council commit to a dollar-for-dollar replacement of reduced funding from gaming trusts? I suspect the answer would be no. So how do we replace these funds? First cab off the rank could be decreased from my rent of Claudelands, which comes in about $64,000 a year. What about other trusts? Well, unfortunately, these usually have significantly lower funding pools. For example, $30,000 to $50,000 as a maximum to organisations such as myself. very tight restrictions on staff hire, so I wouldn't be able to take on board the staff numbers that I do have through other gaming trusts funding. What about commercial? Yes, we have the Magic as our banner team in the organisation, but it's a pretty tough out there in terms of commercial revenue. Currently, we have 9 significant properties via the Magic in terms of commercial properties. Firstly, naming rights, that is not filled at the moment. We have opportunities for 3 principal partners, we only have 2 in place. 5 major partners, and we only have 3 in place. So that is 6 of 9 major partnerships that are filled and 3 that aren't. That's currently coming in at around 400,000 of lost revenue opportunities that I can't secure. And these partnerships take months, if not years, to try and put in place, where gaming trust funding is quarterly or yearly on the long term. So it's as I say, it's very tough, especially for women's sport. Very, very tough environment. So I've got to compete with the Chiefs, Waikato Rugby Union, Northern Districts Cricket, New Zealand Rowing, New Zealand Cycling, New Zealand Canoe, Sprint Canoe, Midlands Hockey, and the Avanti Drone, just to name a few in the Greater Hamilton area. As an anecdotal piece of evidence, I got very excited yesterday when I got a new sponsorship deal for $7,500. It's going to take 85 of those deals to replace 100% of the gaming trust funding. And obviously we're not talking about 100% loss in funding, but that gives you some idea of the sort of quid pro quo and balance that I have to achieve almost on a daily basis. So in summary, gaming trust revenue in netball has a direct positive impact on the sporting, health and well-being and professional development opportunities for females in Hamilton, with a disproportionate number of women from Māori, Pacifica and lower socioeconomic groups benefiting from netball and directly via gaming trust revenue for my sport. With no immediate opportunity to replace gaming trust funds, services and opportunities will need to be reduced. So Netball Waikato Bay of Plenty would be recommending that the proposed policy change not be passed. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll go straight to questions. Councillor McPherson.
Thanks. And I take your points about women's sport in general as well, the difficulty there, thanks. You talked about, you posed the question, where would we replace lost funding, and then you posed the point, maybe we could decrease the rent from Claudelands. You only use Claudelands for your professional team though, don't you? Not for community or kids netball.
But as you would expect, a professional franchise helps fund community through, we need to use the Magic to generate some profits and other revenue that then feeds down into community netball.
Good. The 20-odd courts at Minogue Park were, the construction, they were completely funded by council initially, and the maintenance and upgrades, except for the covered bit, which I think you contributed to.
There's nothing covered at Minogue Park that I'm aware of.
Just a plan, sorry.
The plans, yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So council contribute a fair amount to your sport through that particular purpose. Absolutely, and we thank you for that. Across the Waikato and other regions, councils contribute significantly to netball courts, and without your support, the sport would struggle. Absolutely. Thanks.
Thank you, Mayor.
This is the sort of the chicken and egg stuff, because obviously I acknowledge your massive work in women's sport, and particularly your reference to lower income households in terms of life-changing experiences. Yep. But some of those same lower income households will be affected by the massive ripple effect of gambling issues. Has netball and other sports engaged with central government? Because it seems to me, in an ideal world, you'd have a broader range of funding so that you weren't just reliant on the proceeds of gambling. And I'm wondering in terms of the bigger picture, if you've looked at?
Very, very good point. And it is an area where we're starting to increase our advocacy with central government. I know our Chief Executive, Jenny Wiley at Netball New Zealand, and the board of Netball New Zealand are really starting to take a more active advocacy road with central government and Sport New Zealand and High Performance Sport New Zealand. Personally, locally, I've invited every MP, constituent MP, to games here, and as our very deep relationship with the council, we, as a matter of course, always invite key members of the council as well to those home games. So we're starting to increase that. As a it's not even anecdotal, it's hard fact. I've just returned from 21 years overseas, back home here, and the level of central government funding for sport countries I've been working in is, compared to New Zealand, is dramatically different. For example, I was working for Volleyball England a few years ago, a sport of only 15,000 participants, and we were getting $3 million or 1.5 million pounds per year for participation programs and support of the organisation. Netball New Zealand receives $75,000 from Sport New Zealand. So you see the balance there.
Absolutely, and it's a broad issue where taxes go for population health goals, which obviously your organisation is a key provider of good population health.
Yep, and we had a partnership with the DHB last year, and we're having a new partnership with another health organisation this year to use our reach for exactly that, for good health messages.
Thank you for the generosity of the Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Mayor Andrew.
So, am I correct that your summary is presenting for netball and justifying taking from poker machines a percentage of the users are vulnerable, which is affecting a large amount of children in our city, so that you can subsidise your sport?
No. Subsidise our sport to make sure our sport gives the opportunities for those exact children to live a more healthy and life, and actually have opportunities through netball to go to university. We now have scholarship programs in place, whereas many years ago we didn't. So a young Māori girl from Hamilton can use netball to not only be a healthy person and have great well-being, but then go to university, get a degree, and then potentially work in our sport. And those opportunities come very much funded through gaming trust funds to us. As I mentioned, 22%. We wouldn't be able to provide anywhere near the opportunities for those young women without that sort of funding.
So again, you're justifying taking money from a time at times for some members.
I refuse to let you put those words in my mouth.
Yeah, okay. I think
Mayor.
the question has been asked and answered as best as you can.
Yep.
I just have one, thank you, Mayor Andrew. I have one question. Have you spoken to the trusts that you apply to for funds over the proposed policy?
We're constantly talking to all of our grant funders. The big three would be NZCT, who are here today, Lion Foundation and Grassroots.
So you've spoken to them. Have they indicated to you through that conversation if this policy went ahead as is proposed, whether there would be any detrimental effect immediately?
No, none of the discussions would say immediately, as in a week, month, half a year, but their indication would be over time that there would be negative implications to their revenue.
Over time, as and when and if a venue's closed down. So there'd be, I guess what I'm asking is there a risk if this policy went ahead in the conversations that you've had with the trusts of them pulling funding back based on a principle?
Oh, not on a principle, because our funding is very much outcome-based, so we need to be showing to the trust that we're growing netball and we're providing more opportunities.
Yep, you've answered my question clearly. Thank you very much. And thank you for taking the time to talk to us today.
Thank you.
Right, our next submitter is Bill Heslop. from Waikato Rugby Referees Association. Good afternoon, Bill.
Good afternoon.
Welcome.
Thank you.
The bell will ding at 7 minutes and you need to leave a couple of minutes for questions.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for listening. Look, a politician I am not, and I've heard some pretty technical figures thrown around. So, look, I'm here more, on behalf of the Referees Association, but also Tainui Waka Māori Rugby. But more importantly, as a 54-year-old Hamiltonian, lived here all my life. In fact, recently bought the house I was born in, just down the road from Mr Thomas's place. And I look around the room and I know a lot of people in the room, directly or indirectly, and I'd suggest that we've all benefited from gaming money, directly or indirectly, in some form in our lives. And for me, I certainly have, and now I'm responsible for applying for funding for the Referees Association and for Tainui Waka Māori Rugby. I do work for Waikato Rugby, but I'm not here representing them today. Look, to me, in layman's terms, gambling, there are problem gamblers out there. There's no two ways about that. I mean, we can't hide behind that. We're talking about 0.3 or 0.7%, and I get all that. But if I have owned a Class 4 gaming site myself for 2 years, and I've policed for 16 years in the city, and I'm now with the Waikato Rugby Union, and I have to say the Class 4 gaming sites have been the most heavily regulated outfit I've ever been associated with, whether it be through the trust itself and the setup, and through the DIA and the regulations required and what you've got to do. So I firmly believe that it is money going back to society for good reason. I also believe that people will gamble regardless of Class 4. They'll end up at Hamilton Casino, somewhere like that, and that money will not come back to the community at all. Very little. So, look, I'll go back to the referees, $50,000 a year. What does it do for them? It pays for the petrol to get from Hamilton to Tokoroa, from wherever, so within the Waikato region. It's not to give them a gold medal, it's not to give them food on their table, it's to actually provide match officials for our major sport. And what I've been talking of recently, I was brought up on rugby, racing and beer. Racing's dying, we know that. Beer, police club, doesn't exist anymore. Rugby clubs, that beer culture has died. You're killing rugby as well, if we're not careful. So to me, I'm just trying to speak passion here, but at Tainui Waka Māori Rugby, 5 teams of, I would say 40% of them don't play club rugby. They play this one tournament every year, which is over 3 weekends. It pays for their transport. Now, they are not going to stump up the money for the bus or for the minivans. Yes, it does pay for a few jerseys from time to time, but that's probably a turnover of every 5 or 6 years. So it does pay for the odd jersey as well. But again, it's not paying them directly. There's other things that it pays for, like St John's ambulance people to be at matches. Who's going to pay for that? Rugby's quite heavily regulated with respect and responsibility, your health and safety, your child welfare policies. So we've got to do a whole lot of things around that, around the referees and the Tainui Waka Māori Rugby as well. I'm just struggling to find where that money's going to come from if we restrict our current policy. I mean, the shrinking lid policy is in place. I accept that. I don't agree with it, but I accept it. But if we're going to even shrink it down even further over time, I don't know where this money's coming from. And it'll destroy Hamilton. Now, going around our fields, I know our council is currently, and the reason I'm here is from a recent meeting at Sport Waikato, and I noticed on Sport Waikato's walls, they've got 3 major Class 4 sites on their wall as funders for them. So what's going to happen to Sport Waikato? Our kids are not actively enough now. They're not active enough. And over time, it won't happen overnight, but over time, we're going to reduce that if we're not careful. So, as a Hamiltonian, I'm just here to speak up for people of my era, I guess, that do benefit from these funds. And do I gamble? Yeah, I've gambled. I've been to the casino. I've had a Class 4 gaming site, so I wouldn't say I'm a problem gambler. I'm certainly not in that 3% or whatever it is, or 0.3%, but it's a social activity as well as a problem. And I do feel sorry for those that do have the problem. But I have seen the harm minimisation policies and things like that having, and they're extremely rigid, is the term I use. It's kind of my submission, really.
Great, thanks, Bill. Councillor Mallett.
Thank you, Bill. I don't think I'll be saying no one around here is against gambling if there were no problem gamblers. Might be wrong, but I assume no one thinks that there's anything wrong with gambling, except that some people do it too much and it wrecks their lives, and that's bloody important.
Oh, absolutely.
I got it. Okay.
Councillor
So can you tell me?
Councillor Mallett, can you please not swear?
Oh, sorry. Yep.
Yeah. Thank you. Continue.
Bill,
I'm not offended by that, sir.
Yeah. Well, you're a ref. I swore at refs all the time. Spend my life swearing. Okay. Look, I'm really interested in the harm minimisation and get quite focused on here. How actually, now I don't want the DIA stuff. I want to know on site how and who regulates the punter. Who is. So how does that actually happen? Now I understand. Sorry to butt you in. I understand that if you get caught doing something wrong, you lose your license or stuff. But on the actual site, what were the sort of things that you and I assume the gambling was an important part of your business, not the basis of it, but yes. So how did you do it?
Sure. 2011 I sold the business, so I might be out of date in current practices, but the practices we had, for example, when I bought the pub, it was the Boston at the time, I think it's called, it's at Hillcrest anyway.
Yeah, I know the one.
Okay, we wanted to, it was quite tired, for want of a better term, so we wanted to redesign the lounge. So we had to get the DIA in we even wanted a door, there was a back door entrance to it. We had to literally lock that up and put metal bars across it, because part of the harm minimisation that we're required to do was that if you were at the bar, you had to physically view people going into the gaming room. So, and there had to be cameras in there. Every time a person would be recognised as a problem gambler, the trust at the time...
Sorry, Bill, how do you recognise a person as a problem gambler? Because they just...
sorry, when I say the DA or the trust recognised a problem gambler, at the time we were with NZCT, they would send us a colour photo of that person.
Okay.
So it was a person within that, I think it was within the Hamilton area, so resided within the Hamilton area, and we had to make sure that all staff, we had weekly meetings with all staff just based around gaming. Sometimes it would be a meeting for the sake of having a meeting, to be quite frank, because there wasn't a problem.
There's no photo.
No. Yeah. Or there wasn't a photo, but you know, you get to know your local people, and there's signs. I've seen it more overseas in my overseas travels than in New Zealand, with people using machines, and that's an obvious sign to people. That's the kind of training people have. We never saw that in our site. We did recognise one person, so we approached that person, and there was no confrontation or anything like that. They left because they know that they're a problem gambler. So it's I don't know what it's like, but I'm trying to sort of... But, it was, like I say, Mr Mallett, it was, you had to know, and there's also that fear of the DIA. Okay. Absolutely.
And putting another hat on, did you say you're a policeman?
Yes.
Okay, so how involved do the police get in this sort of stuff?
I left in 1998, no.
Okay.
Nothing.
Okay, so you don't know. Okay, before it came on. Okay.
We're more worried about beer and racing back in those days.
Yeah, the real...
Okay,
Old Boys Rugby Club.
Okay. Let's not reminisce about those days. Thank you, Bill, for an excellent submission.
Thanks, ma'am.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Right, the submitter up is the Lion Foundation. Murray Reid. Good afternoon. How are you? Kia ora. You have 10 minutes. The bell will ding at 7, allowing you the time for questions from elected members.
So I had a PowerPoint presentation.
Yes, that's fine.
Tēnā koutou katoa, tēnā koutou e ngā iwi o tēnei rohi, tēnā koutou e ngā mana, e ngā reo, e ngā rangatira. Kia ora koutou katoa.
Kia ora.
So my name is Murray Reid. I'm the Chief Executive for the Lion Foundation, and it's my privilege to be here today, and I thank you all for the opportunity to speak, conscious of the time that I've got.
They have a copy, so we can keep going.
Okay. So I've got a presentation here that you will have a copy of.
We do.
If I can just flick through it.
Keep going.
Okay. So just a bit of history on the Lion Foundation. We were established in 1988 to distribute funds raised from Class 4 gaming, which is the poker machines you've been hearing about today. Since the Lion Foundation was established, we've distributed in the order of $850 million to the New Zealand community. The Lion Foundation is a national organisation. We operate about 100-odd, or have relationships with about 130 venues throughout New Zealand, so we've set up 4 regional committees located within the local areas of New Zealand to distribute those funds back to those communities. In particular, we have a relationship with 4 venues in Hamilton, and from those 4 venues, looking at the financial year for financial year 18, there were about 145 grants made, totalling about $1.4 or $1.5 million in terms of community funding. Our view is that while we accept and understand the need for sinking lid policies and understand the rationale behind it, we would ask that you consider retaining the relocation provisions as they stand at the moment. You've heard before from Mr. True and some of the other presenters the benefits that, notwithstanding the impact that gambling has on people, the benefits that could accrue back to the community, particularly around protecting the business interest of the operators that run those businesses, who employ people, who return to the community and have a real part to play in the community, but also the longer term continuation of community benefits through the grants that are distributed. And you've heard some of the positive impacts that this funding can have in terms of those grant recipients. And in particular, we've been very fortunate to have been able to benefit from this relocation policy. The Te Rapa Tavern, as Mr. True alluded to in his presentation, was relocated in around 2014, and the ability to relocate that venue retained approximately $2 million in community funding since that time. So if we hadn't been able to relocate the Te Rapa Tavern, that would have been $2 million lost to the community. I'm sure that would have been a difficult sum to find from sources. So I'd just like to touch on some of the couple of examples of the community support that the funding generated out of Hamilton has been able to add value to. The Perry Outdoor Education Trust, and I acknowledge Mr. Simon Perry, who's here today. They work with schools. They provide a unique and invaluable outdoor education experience for both the students and teachers. So this is fundamental to the education component of our society. It was mentioned before the St. John organisation. We contributed $150,000 to that organisation, and we know that St. John were called out to 13,080 separate incidents during that reporting period, as I understand. So I hope that the $150,000 that was generated out of the Class 4 gaming effort certainly added value in that regard. Looking at support to local sports clubs, and once again we've heard some presentations on that, but in particular we $35,000 to Melville, our local sports club, so that's a flagship football club in Hamilton, and I'm sure you're all familiar with it. 230 members, 70 volunteers, coaches, referees, administrators, and some of those other functions that are critical to sporting organisations. $50,000 to the Media Theatre. Over 19,000 users every year. So once again, we're seeing the broader impact of the funding that Class 4 gaming is able to provide and the benefits that they provide to the community. There's a list up there, and I won't go through every one of them. There's probably about 140 odd community groups that were supported in the last financial year just from the Lion Foundation, and that's just from the 4 venues that we have a positive relationship with. So there's a page there. And then there's another page also of community organisations that we support. So I guess the issue really is, and it's been discussed, is what if you remove the ability to relocate venues? What's the answer to that? And that's a question that you'll have to answer, but what I'm suggesting to you to help balance that decision is that there's some really great positives that come from the value add that we are able to provide back into your community. And it's we feel it's quite substantial. So in view of that, we would like to suggest that we retain the relocation policy as it stands at the moment.
Thank you,
Murray.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Councillor Mallett.
Thank you
I'm really interested in the minimisation scenario thing. I don't think anyone would disagree with the value of the funds back to community organisations, blah blah blah. So you were here just a couple of seconds ago. We talked about spoke to a bar owner and ex-policeman. Where minimisation come in at the gambling trust level?
It's our number one priority.
So can you give us more detail on that? So do you have training courses? Do you have you smack your people on the you tell your people tidy things up? Tell us what you do.
Sure. So it's robust, and I come from a service background as well, so I have a bit of experience in
service. What does service mean?
So military background.
Okay,
so I understand the need to have regulatory staff, and I also worked at Eden Park, which was quite a large organisation, which was subject to some pretty robust regulatory. So I have a fair understanding. So to come back to your question, I would say that we are probably the most highly regulated industry in New Zealand. So coming into more detail into your question, there's a series of things that we have to do. That ranges from on-site training in terms of recognising harmful people who are presenting with harm. And so we train our staff and we train the bar staff as well to do that. So that, for us...
Because the bar staff aren't your staff, are they?
No.
They're employed by someone else, yeah.
No, that's correct. So, that occurs on a weekly basis, really, for us. So we have a group of staff that go around and visit our venues. It varies depending on the society, but essentially you're required to do that training. It is law, you have to do the training. And that requires the staff on the venue to regularly go through the venue and check to recognise some of those behaviours. And if they see those behaviours, and one extreme one is kicking a machine, that is very extreme, but there's things like asking, oh geez, this $20 should have been spent on bread or something like that. That's a presentation of a harmful outcome, if you like, or a harmful behaviour. So those kinds of things are recorded and they're submitted back to us into the DIA, and then we record that in a confidential file. Players themselves can...
Just explain who you mean by players.
The people who use the machines.
Oh, okay. Oh, got you.
So if a player has a problem, they can come in or go to the DIA and acknowledge that they have a problem. And you heard the process before where all venues are then advised of, or the venues concerned are advised that that person has a problem, and then there's a picture that goes out, if you like, that if that person is seen in the venue, then action is taken. Right through to the DIA undertaking inspections. So we do our own at an operational level. We do that with the staff, and we train the staff, and we train our staff. The DIA also go through and undertake inspections, and you heard the point before. They are pretty rigorous, and if you fail those, then you lose your licence and you're fined.
Okay. And just some people might think this is a patsy question, but does it work?
Yeah.
Okay, because I'm not aware of any big scandals in the newspapers about this going wrong, but I may be ignorant of that. So, I really want to hear if something goes wrong. I want to know what happens when something goes wrong.
So you're talking from a player's perspective or a society's perspective, or just...
Both, I guess. Bill gave us a bit of info about what happened on the site where the rubber meets the road. But these things, there's a governance requirement coming in from above too.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you talk about governance, all the societies... there's a licence process you go to apply to hold a licence to operate Class 4 gaming machines. That's pretty rigorous.
And how often are those renewed?
Yearly.
Okay, so every year you have to rock up and prove that you have got systems, mitigation systems and harm protection systems in your outfit. Is there an audit?
Yes. So the audits are infrequently. So I can only speak for the Lion Foundation. Within the last 2-year period, we had a full audit. So to give you an indication of the depth of that audit, we probably had, over a period of 6 days, 12 DIA staff go through all of our administration, all of our documentation to determine exactly...
Now, a lot of that will be that the money's going to the right place, and those, I assume. But I'm really interested in the stuff that's harm minimisation, like...
Oh, so that's definitely checked as well.
Okay.
One of the other things that we work collaboratively within the group of societies, and we also work collaboratively with the DIA, because our key feature of what we do is minimising harm. We don't want people to be harmed by this. So We work with the health prevention people, and one of the exercises, in addition to all of that stuff, is a mystery shopper exercise, which may sound common sense to you, but it's actually quite an important tool. So they'll come in and they'll audit, if you like, on a mystery shopper basis your venue and the operator that you have a relationship with. They'll provide you the feedback, and then we go about fixing those problems. So there's that measure as well as all the other stuff. But coming back to your question in terms of the audit, they audit everything. Absolutely everything, down to the cost of a pen that you buy in your office. So it's quite rigorous.
Sorry, we are at nearly 11 minutes now for this one submitter, and we've got 2 other questions here. And elected members, we are now into your lunchtime, so I think we'll thank you, Councillor Mallett. Councillor Casson.
Thank you, Murray. Just quickly, so the just for clarity, the 1.749 million given out to Hamilton non-profit organisations and that was collected solely from the 4 Hamilton locations?
Pretty much.
Yeah. So do you know do you have a rough idea of how much goes through those machines each year? Those
yeah, I do, but like off the top of my head, I could work backwards from 1.7 because what I could give you, I could come back to you on that, but off the top of my head, I couldn't give you an exact number.
No, that's right, mate.
Okay. And Councillor Henry.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your presentation, Murray. Look, it sounds like you are extremely, strictly controlled by what you're doing. Now, the other question, just previous presenters, what I'm hearing, and I could be totally wrong here, but it sounds like the problem gamblers are known, aren't they? I mean, there's pictures, you know when they come in, so they're known. They're known to the DIA, or could be known to the DIA. So why isn't the government more proactive? And if they're known to the DIA, they can be passed on to the MOH or some other agency, and they could work with the families directly instead of us cutting down everything of the community groups losing the money. They could work because we're only worried about gamblers. So could there be another way to work with that? What do you think?
Absolutely, and I think there are pathways to that, and I'm pretty sure the DIA with the particular health agencies do that. You've got to remember there's privacy involved here as well. So, you know, once that information is passed on, you've got to be respectful of the persons or person and the manner in which they provided that information. So we don't see beyond, once that information is provided, then there is a whole process that kicks in, and there are agencies around that provide that kind of support that will deal with those kinds of problems. Answer your question, absolutely, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Just have one last question. We heard from Mr. True in terms of the Te Rapa Tavern, and we saw the differences between the old venue and new, and they come under your gaming trust as one of your venues. Can you tell me, with the relocation, was there any change in the income from the pokie machines, either increase, decrease, or did it remain the same?
There was some increase, but then arguably they had an increase in business in any case. You know, the new premises and
yes, I understand that, but all I'm wanting to, because there was a relationship and a point made that the opportunity to relocate can also. The relationship can also mean that there could be more funds available for the community because it's a nicer venue, and so there was some increase. Yeah. Okay. Look, thank you very much. A very good submission. Thank you.
Thank you. Kia ora.
And thank you, Councillor McPherson, Deputy Mayor, have to go to a DHB meeting, so thank you for your attendance up till today, up till now. Our last submission before lunch, and this is in our lunchtime, is Jen Palmer from Te Awa River Rise. Is Jen here? Oh, Brian's here. Simon's here. You are Simon, I know that.
Yes.
Hi, Simon.
For Jen, she's in Italy cycling, so.
Oh, yes.
Sent me over
as you do.
Do
okay.
the dirty work.
So we've got 10 minutes. We're in your hands.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair and councillors. Yes, I've come along today as a trustee and chair of Te Awa Cycle Trust. We're a beneficiary and recipient of community gaming funding. And I might add that it's going tremendously well, and we look forward to starting our new section this summer. But I wear a couple of In terms of the gaming side, I have been chair of Perry Foundation, which was involved in gaming, and merged with Lion Foundation. In fact, we appointed Murray, who you just heard from, a few years ago. I'm no longer involved in those organisations, but obviously have quite an extensive background. And the reason I'm here, I guess, is to represent community groups who do benefit from community gaming, and that spans across all sorts of areas: tennis, swimming, cycling, cycleways, outdoor education trusts, as you just heard from Murray, and many other organisations. So I guess I have some sympathy for you here, because gaming is I guess a bit of a conscience vote in terms of there is no right or wrong, there's no yes or no. There's a number of opinions in the room whether it involves gambling, and really what you have to do is make a rational, I guess, look at the benefits. And I guess the two key points that I just want to make is that in terms of gaming, the community gaming sector does, I guess, get a lot of attention from the press and so forth in regards to harm minimisations and so on, and you've heard a bit from Murray here. I just want to draw your attention to the Lotto annual report, which I picked up this morning, and their sales have gone up to 1.2 billion in the last year. The highest ever is up 24%. There's 1,400 venues where you can buy your Lotto tickets, including the Z Energy gas stations, and they're going very well. And so they pay a good portion of that, and 273 million goes back to the community every year. So that's fantastic, and bravo. 3,000 community groups benefit from that. I buy the odd Lotto ticket, not too often, but the reality is that 622 million isn't paid out, and therefore when you look at the Lotto players, 2 million people play Lotto every year and 1 million play every month. So basically there's 1 million people that invest around $600 a year in Lotto that doesn't get paid out. And some of them probably invest a lot more than $600, because that's an average figure. But luckily around 40-something% of those of total proceeds is paid out to community groups. Now community gaming is very similar to that. Over 40% is paid out to community groups. The problem is that the community gaming sector don't have a glossy annual report, because it's made up of over 1,000 different organisations, venues like the one you just heard from. And they're not particularly well organised when it comes to representing themselves. But the good news is that the number of venues has dropped from 25,000 down to 15-odd thousand in the last 12, 15 years. Things were escalating, and as Murray just mentioned, the legislation now is very extensive, and the amount of controls in the industry are huge. And in fact, if you look at the problem gambling statistics, the numbers are 0.3% that represent themselves as having a problem in gaming. And that could span across Lotto, it could span across casinos, it could span across gaming machines, and of course the internet gambling, which no one can control. There's a whole lot of risks out there in terms of gaming. I guess what we would be saying is that in terms of this industry, it is very well controlled and regulated. The numbers have come back significantly, and the amount that is to problem gambling cases is very substantial. And I think, and so in terms of venue relocation, we're talking about at the moment judging that against a whole range of benefits. And on the benefits front, obviously, you've heard from Murray and Lion Foundation themselves. Around $10 million goes back into Hamilton City a year across a whole range of groups and infrastructure from community gaming proceeds. And that's very significant. I know that things like the Velodrome and the Cycleway and Waikato Stadium and a whole lot of other facilities probably wouldn't be the facilities they are, or wouldn't even be there necessarily if it wasn't for that sector. So I guess my summary of that is that the benefits are significant. The risks have been very well dealt with under legislation as it stands, and anyone can buy a Lotto ticket. It's not just about gaming. So if you try to continue to minimise that community gaming sector, a person with a problem is going to find another way to spend their money, whether it's on a Lotto ticket, in a casino, betting at the races, or spending it on the internet, which of course no one can control. So I think look at the broader context of gaming and just be aware that there is plenty of protective mechanisms in place to support those people. And happy to take any questions.
Great, thank you, Simon. Councillor Mallett.
Thank you, Simon. Simon, you heard me ask the questions about harm minimisation earlier. I'm
Yes,
sure if you heard.
yes, I was.
Do you want to add to that? At your level, you know, you're quite high in the governance structure. How big what's your comment on that?
Well, as I mentioned, 0.3 of 1% present themselves as having a risk in terms of problem gaming. Now, across the country, that is around 10,000 people, 10 or 12,000 people. Yep. So if you took Hamilton as being 3% of the country, there's probably 300 people in Hamilton who you could say have a gambling problem. That's a reality. If you continue to sort of, I suppose, put a sinking lid in place that continues to reduce the number of community gaming machines, there are so many other ways that those people can continue their habit of spending money that they can't afford to spend. So the idea is about putting in very good mechanisms within the community gaming sector. I believe they are stronger than any other sector. You can go and buy a lotto ticket, and we've seen them, you line up in a supermarket and see people spending $200 on lotto that probably they shouldn't be.
Yeah.
But there it is. So
Okay.
whereas there is a lot of legislation, there's a lot of messaging and so forth that comes into the community gaming sector that really does put a brake on in terms of that activity.
All right, thank you, Simon.
Gate.
Good morning, afternoon.
Morning.
Good afternoon, actually. Thank you for that. So, did you say that 6% of lotto gets returned? How much?
No, it's about of the 1.2 billion spent. They pay out. There's about 620 million that 580 million out in prizes. So you've got a net spend of 623 million, I think it was last year.
Okay.
Of that, 273 is paid out to community groups. Okay. So it's about 44% of the, I guess, net take that they. The rest goes in taxes, goes to pay the salaries of people in lotto. It goes to the vendors. The commission's paid to all the shops. Advertising, etc. The TV doesn't come cheap. That's right.
Okay, thank you. So your key point in like you say, it's not an easy area to balance up, but the rational analysis of costs and benefits. So your position is that the benefits significantly outweigh the harm that is done in this instance.
That is correct.
Thank you.
All right, Councillor Henry.
Sorry, I was just thinking of something. Thank you so much, Simon. Because you mentioned it a couple of times, problem gamblers do not just come through the pokies, do they? Wouldn't it be great to find out where they actually come from which, like where they spend their money, so we're actually very clear that maybe we're talking about, we're spending time here talking about something that is not really that big a deal.
Yes, and a lot of problem gamblers unfortunately have codependency issues. So they may have depression issues, they could have alcohol issues, drug issues, family issues. So it's often a very complex scenario, and they'll express it through gaming. But it's not necessarily gaming that's the problem, it's another problem.
True. Thank you.
That's it. Thank you very much, Simon.
Thank you.
Great. Elected members, we will be back at 1:15 for lunch. That's all we get because we've used 10 minutes. Too many questions. Amy, can I have a plug? No, plug in.